mandatory marking of petroleum products, then the counting or metering device, and lastly, the earmarking of incremental petroleum excise tax. May we also ask Attorney Bihor Mendoza, PUB1 Utak Transport Legal Counsel, to take your seat. Mr. Efren De Luna, Acto National President, and Colonel Lino Marable, President Cotex. Good afternoon. Can you settle down now? Senator Sani is on his way. In few minutes, we will start.
Hey, good afternoon. Apologize for the somewhat late start. Uh, had some visitors unexpected. So now pangilan hearing na? 13th. This is the 13th, hopefully not unlucky, hearing for the train bills, House Bill 5636 and Senate Bill 1408. So we can hear our guests. We'll dispense with any preliminary statements for now, and I will give the floor to the resource persons, but first we'll have them recognized by our committee secretary. Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair, Senator Angara. For today's hearing from the government agencies, we have Undersecretary Carl Kendrick Chua from the Department of Finance, together with Ms. Karen Ebasco, Miss Philippines Earth 2017. Representing the Bureau of Internal Revenues, Attorney Nestor Valeroso, the Deputy Commissioner Operations Group, with Attorney Nino Asuncion. Representing the Bureau of Customs is Director James Layug of the Port Operational Services, with Attorney Althea Acas, the Project Manager of the Bureau of Customs. We have the Executive Director, Trinidad A. Rodriguez of the National Tax Research Center. Representing the Department of Budget and Management, we have the Director for Rolando Toledo of the Fiscal Planning and Reforms Bureau. Representing the Department of Social Welfare and Development, we have Undersecretary Emmanuel Leico. Representing the Department of Transportation, we have Attorney Donna Samson, the Technical Assistance for Legal Affairs. Representing Land Transportation Franchising Regulatory Board, we have Attorney Agustin M. Bestil. From the Department of Energy, we have the Director for the Oil Industry Management Bureau, Attorney Rino Abad. From the National Power Corporation, we have the Manager of the Revenue Management Department, Mr. Salvador Sarmiento Jr. From the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, we have the Deputy Director of the Department of Economic Research in the person of Mr. Dennis Bautista. From the Department of Trade and Industry, we have the Director of the Bureau of Trade and Industrial Policy, Ms. Maria Lourdes Yapting-Chay. From the Land Transportation Group, we have Attorney Bigor Mendoza, the President of PUB1 UTAC. We have Colonel Lino Marable, the President of the Confederation of UB Express Corporation. Mr. Rizalino Villarasa, the President of Federation of Ayala Center Transport Terminal. We have Ms. Yuen Abanana of the Partido Manggagawa. From the Chairman of the Confederation of Truckers Association of the Philippines, in the person of Mr. Roberto Bayocot. We have also Mr. Orlando F. Marquez, the National President of the Liga ng Transportasyon at Operators sa Pilipinas. We have Mr. Efren De Luna, the President of the Alliance of Concerned Transport Organization. And we have Attorney Ibes Gonzalez, the Head of the Government Relation and Public Policy of the Uber Philippines. From the airline and the shipping industry, I have also Ms. Leonie De Guzman, bukluran ng mga manggagawang Pilipino. From the airline and shipping industry, we have Attorney Herschel Magracia, the Legal Counsel of the Alliance of Philippine Fishing Federation Incorporated. We have Attorney Pedro Aguilar, the Executive Director of the Philippine Inter-Island Shipping Association. And we have also Attorney Inigo Pieras, the Legal Counsel of the Philippine Airlines. To react on the fuel marking, we have Ms. Rosario C. Bradbury, the Country Manager of the Authentics, together with Mr. Brian Bailey, the Manager of the Oil, Gas and Chemical Group, SGS Philippines, with Ms. Krista Pilios, Manager of the Oil Gas. We have also Mr. Bobby Batumbakal, the Country Manager of the Dow Chemical Pacific Limited Philippines. We have also Mr. Ramon Lakdan, Region Southeast Asia Manager, United Color Manufacturer, together with Dr. Michael Hinton, International Sales and Managing Director, and Dr. Harris Dosi, Technical Director. From the civic groups, we have Mr. Teodoro Reyes, the Executive Director of the Petroleum Institute of the Philippines. We have Dr. Victor Abola, the economist of from the University of Asia Pacific, together with economist Ronilo Balberan. We have also Engineer Jose Lugarta, the Energy Policy Advisor, together with Ms. May Benaventura of the Freedom from Debt Coalition. And finally, we have Mr. Christopher Pastrana, the chairperson of the Archipelago Philippine Ferries Corporation. Those are our guests, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Iris. Thank you, Committee Secretary. We'd like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Risa Ontiveros and Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. Senator Gatchalian is the chair of the Committee on Energy, so we'll, I'm sure he has a lot of inputs also from that side, no? We'd like to change the order a little bit because traditionally the government agencies have come first, but after Yusek Chua, we'll give him a word to summarize the positions, and then maybe we'll do civil society and the academe first para hindi naman lugi sila lagi yung huli. Mauna naman sila. But Yusek, will give you the floor. Maybe tell us a little bit about the fuel marking and if it's necessary to have it in the legislation as specific as it is right now, or maybe just to give the DOF a blanket authority to kind of, because it strikes me as more of an administrative measure, which in fact you probably don't need legislation for. You can probably you could implement it tomorrow if you wanted to, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. If there are any lawyers in the around the body, when please feel free to weigh in, no? But I'm just thinking from the point of view that if the well, God forbid it doesn't prove effective, then we have to repeal the law later on, and we all know how difficult that is, no? So, Yusek, yeah, please.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Senator Angara, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Ontiveros, and fellow stakeholders. I would like to very briefly first address the question of the Chair. I think the fuel marking should be an intrinsic program of the Bureau of Customs and the Bureau of Internal Revenue. It need not be legislated. It could be implemented using administrative force. However, after much discussion, we feel that legislating it would give it more teeth, and especially on the penalty provisions. However, we would like to propose in summary that instead of having very detailed provisions in the law, we could relegate some of them to the implementing rules and regulation, but keep the highlights of this, the importance and the penalty if this program would not be, should be how this program should be implemented. Mr. Chair, if I may just give 10 very few statements as an opening. Is that allowed?
Please do, please, yes.
Thank you. Instead of our very detailed opening remarks, which I will just submit to the committee secretariat, I would like to just summarize the top 10 positions at the Department of Finance, together with more than 200 stakeholders who have supported the tax reform. I would like to begin with the notion that this oil excise tax reform must be seen as part of the overall package, which includes the reduction in the personal income tax, the increase in the automobile, the introduction of the sugar-sweetened beverage, and the broadening of the VAT base, alongside all the administrative reforms to improve efficiency in BIR, BOC, and all the budget reforms to improve or to reduce underspending. The second is I would like to emphasize that this reform, contrary to public opinion, is really very equitable, pro-environment and pro-health. Number 3 is we have not adjusted our oil excise rates since 1997, and in 2005 we have reduced to zero the excise of diesel and the number of oil products, which proved to be dirtier. As a result, the Philippines has one of the lowest tax as a share of fuel retail price in the world. This really promotes wastage and inefficient use and harms environment and health and our long-term development. Fortunately, number 5, we are in a very low oil price environment. The Dubai crude today is $50 per barrel compared to $130 per barrel 4 years ago, and this provides us the opportunity to index oil excise tax rates. Number 6, this reform is very progressive. Without reforming this, who really benefits are the rich, who are subsidized when they buy fuel, diesel for instance. The richest 2 million families in a survey done by the Philippine Statistics Authority found that the richest 2 million families consume already 51% of oil products and transportation costs. And the simple reason is because they have cars and many cars. And whenever they fill the tank, it is 2,000 pesos. In fact, the richest 200,000 families, or the top 1%, consume already 13% of fuel products and transportation costs, the same share as the bottom 50%, or the poorest 10 million Filipinos. In summary, this current system is actually a tax that subsidizes the rich in the guise of helping the poor, and this is a very bad policy. Number 7, there are many factors that affect prices, and an increase in oil price does not necessarily lead to higher prices or inflation. Factors such as weather, buffer stocking, income, lower poverty, basic supply and demand, and even profiteering are many factors that affect the final price and should not be blamed on tax alone. With a 3 peso increase, inflation, we estimate, will grow from just 3% to 3.9% maximum. Central bank's estimate is lower at 3.6%. Even when diesel increased by 14 pesos last year, from 18 pesos in January 2016 to 32 pesos in January 2017, or a 76% increase, our overall inflation was just 2.7%. In fact, most prices of basic commodities such as rice, fish, sardines, noodles did not increase despite diesel increasing by 76%. And historically, inflation has remained low and stable despite the swings in the oil prices. Number 8, higher oil excise eventually will also help reduce pollution and congestion, 2 factors that really waste our time and our health. Number 9, instead of using tax exemptions to protect the poor, which really subsidizes the rich, we propose that we use targeted cash transfers and other social mitigating measures that can be better targeted at the poor so that they really receive the benefits. In summary, Mr. Chair, I would like to highlight that the oil excise is truly progressive, pro-health, and pro-environment. That is why we in the Department of Finance and our more than 200 stakeholders who support this reform would like to propose that the Senate consider this important reform. The 10 key messages, Mr. Chair, comes with very detailed data that we would like to submit to the Secretariat. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that comprehensive proposal. I understand Ms. Earth is here because of you, Yusek Carl. You, without disrespect to your wife, you look good next to each other, but perhaps she would like to comment. Yeah. Would you like to comment, Ms. Philippines, Ms. Ibasco?
Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon,
Hi. Good afternoon.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
Senator
Senator
Gatchalian.
Gatchalian is, are you single? Senator Gatchalian is the only single, well, sorry, Senator Risa is also single.
Good
Anyway,
afternoon,
sorry.
Senator Hontiveros and Senator Ejercito, and to everyone. In behalf of Carousel Productions Incorporated, Miss Philippines Earth, the organization is actually looking for advocates in which we could really uphold worthy causes such as for the environment. We are not just an event, we're also an organization in which we are a movement, in which we also support other organizations for environmental causes. Now, we believe that climate change exists. That's why one of the things I'm advocating about is the conservation of energy and the embrace of renewable energy in exchange for fossil fuels. We understand that as the Philippines has signed the Paris Treaty, we continue to participate in the cutting the excessive carbon emission and also limiting the global temperature rise to save the Earth. Since now we're also talking about the tax reform for acceleration and inclusion, there is a section about the excise tax on petroleum products, and it is a form also of carbon tax, in which it can do a great deal to the environment as we see it to be one of the things that we can transition people from using fossil fuels to renewable energy. And we will also do our part if ever this would be passed. It's also a great deal of help to the environment. At the same time, it will also help us to start accelerate the decarbonization. It will also give us a chance to participate for all people if ever this will pass. This will be passed, since a tax for petroleum and such as the diesel and LPGs and kerosene and the like will be also given by the Filipino people to also help in the environment and also for the health as well. I know it's a sacrifice on other people's part to cut a portion of their income, and it's a challenge for us to really make people understand and to educate them what this is really about. But I hope that if ever this will be passed, it is going to be a really huge help for us to really understand and for people to understand of what we can do for the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Basco. Is it true you're a nuclear physicist?
Oh, I'm a medical physicist, sir.
Medical physicist. Okay. So Senator JV gave me wrong information. But, fake news, according to...
Sorry, I thought, Chairman, that I
Carl, maybe you should... the two of you should be the DOF spokespersons, and he should be here to lobby with the senators until the passage of the law. No, but I'm just curious. What is the dirtiest fuel? Or in terms, is there a scientific consensus as to effects on the environment? I mean, I was going to ask also as a supplement to that, shouldn't you also tax coal if that's the rationale, as other countries do? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, in fact, the coal and carbon taxation are being proposed as part of package 5, which will be presented soon. I have data on page 120 of the PowerPoint we submitted. In terms of carbon dioxide emission of various fuel types, the heaviest polluter is bunker fuel. It is almost 3 kilograms per liter, followed by diesel, 2.6 kilograms per liter, followed by kerosene, about 2.6 kilograms per liter, and less polluting is gasoline at 2.3 kilograms per liter. This is in the data we submitted, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Yusek Chua. So again, we said, as we said, we'll well, first let's ask the senators. I think in case they want to make any preliminary statements. Senator Risa, would you care to make any statements? Later, okay. Senator JV, would you care to make an initial statement?
Just like to ask, sige si Yusek Carl lang quickly. Yusek Carl, you plan to tax coal on the 5th package, no? But why is it, why not the 1st or 2nd? Because I think coal probably is one of the dirtiest, no? Every time it runs, it emits elements in the atmosphere. I think it should be in the 1st package or 1st or 2nd. Baka yung abuti ba namin yun?
Actually, in fact, packages 2, 3, 4, 5 will be presented.
Kailangan manalo tayo sa election, Senator JV, in response to your question.
This is not 5 or 10 years later. Everything will be presented in the 4th quarter to early next year. The reason why it is not yet ready, this is the first time we're taxing coal, and we're doing very detailed research. However, for the VAT, the oil, the automobile, we have been doing this and have left out the reform for more than 20 years in the case of oil. So that is why we thought we were ready to present to Congress. But rest assured, this will be part. The other reason is Mindanao is relying on coal for power, and we are also trying to balance the need to provide reliable and cheap energy for Mindanao without abruptly affecting prices. That is, Mr. Chair, the reason.
What mining? Because you're talking about the environment,
well,
and the President emphasized mining in his
correct.
SONA.
In package 5, the idea is to put together all the environment, health, and luxury taxation. Because the President has announced the mining, we are now very much into the detail of developing the proposal for mining, and will be presented also very soon.
Senator Risa, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick follow-up point to one of the replies of Yusek Chua to Senator JV. Yes, Mindanao is in large part dependent on coal energy at the moment, but it is also a region that's very rich in yet underdeveloped and underutilized renewable energy resources. Yun lang po, salamat. Yes, including hydro, says our Energy Committee Chair.
Thank you. Senator JV, back to you.
Anyway, earlier I was listening to your Yusek Carl. Your claims that the increase in oil prices from January 2016 to 2017 at 18 pesos per liter in January 2016 and 32 in 2000 only cost a mere 1.5% increase in inflation. So, with the expected passage of this measure, DOF thinks that there's a minimal effect, no? But I would just like to ask, probably Department of Energy can answer, how much would the expected increase in our electricity rates once this increase in excise tax on oil has been implemented? Do we expect mga ilang porsyento kaya ang itataas ng rates?
Mr. Chair, we have to distinguish first on the ILP program. These are the embedded generators of the establishment that we can call on when there is a shortage of. There's an established formula for that, and the computation would be around 2.284 pesos per kilowatt hour. And the second, of course, would be for the peaking power plants, which usually uses diesel, including those mostly on the SPAG area. We have, I have here beside me is the Napocor, but the computation would be around 1.69 pesos per kilowatt hour.
So that will be the expected increase, 1.69?
1.69.
So the current is about 12 pesos ba? Ilan ba tayo per kilowatt hour? How much is the current average rate?
I'd like to acknowledge Minority Leader Senator Frank Drilon.
Mr. Chair, I can actually give the floor to Napocor for that SPAG area.
Napocor, please.
Napocor, please.
Good afternoon, honorable senators. In the off-grid areas, we have different NPPs as well as NPC power plants, and we have different true cost of generation, or TCGRs. But on the average, it would be around 12 pesos per kilowatt hour. So any increase in the cost of fuel due to the excise tax will result in an increase initially on the first year. In our computation, it will be less than 1 peso per kilowatt hour.
So even with an increase of about 6 diesel, you just use it during peaking, tama ho ba? So it won't affect you as much?
So when I say the peaking would be on the on-grid, but on the off-grid, that would be the, I think, the 24 hours.
Pero ano kaya, just to give us an idea, sabihin technical, no? What would be the increase in electrical rate? Ano kaya ang tingin din niyo? Na-estimate niyo na ba ito?
Yes, we have some simulations. For the excise tax of 3 pesos for the first year, the increase in generation is only about 84 centavos per kilowatt hour. So that's on a per kilowatt hour basis. But what we charge the end users in the off-grid areas is what we call the SAGR. So any increase in the generation will be charged to the UCME, which we also apply nationwide. And the resulting increase in the UCME is only very, very small. It's only about 0.0033.
Ano po yung UCME?
Universal charge for missionary electrification.
Okay, Mr. Chair, just like to ask, going back to Yusek Carl, so would you think if given the at its present form, inflation will only increase by about 2%?
If I may, Mr. Chair, first I'd like...
Sorry.
0.9, yes.
0.9%.
But if I may, Mr. Chair, today we rely much less on fossil fuel for power. Only 7% of energy sources come from fossil fuel. That is why even when diesel increased by 76% last year, the overall inflation for electricity is 1.8%. And as Napocor mentioned, those only those in the SPAG areas, the small power utility groups or the islands, will be affected. And the way to help them is to do a pantawid kuryente type to cross-subsidize, or to charge the small increase to the universal charge, so everyone can contribute a little to the effect, so that the increase will not be felt by the poor.
But Yusek, don't you think the basic commodities will be affected? Because we will be increasing by about 6 pesos ba per liter. That's quite a lot, no? So yes. Our concern is that it's almost always a given that every time we increase, there's an increase in that much. For sure, commodities prices will increase. It will be passed on to consumers.
Yes, Mr. Chair, initially I thought that would be the impact, but very detailed data showed that that is necessarily does not follow. I would like to show some data. We gathered the price of laundry bars, sardines, pork, rice, yellow corn, bangus, and noodles last year. even when diesel increased from 18 to 32 pesos, we hardly see any increase in these commodity prices. And as I mentioned a while ago, I would like to argue that the excise or the diesel price is only one factor, and in a very diverse economy is a very small factor. Profiteering, supply, demand, weather are many other reasons that could affect the final price. So, Mr. Chair, we do not really see any effect. If a 14 peso increase in diesel did not increase much the price, we do not think a 3 peso initial increase would have. At the same time, Mr. Chair, we are, as a part of the package, giving back to the people 140 billion in lower income tax if the package will be passed. And of course, this will increase generally the purchasing power of the people. That is why, Mr. Chair, Senator Ejercito, we do not think that there will be much impact on prices.
But going back, Jose Carlo, because I find it hard to believe, Mr. Chair, because, you know, agriculture, sa agriculture lang, let us not go into other sectors, no? Doon lang, they fuse yung mga farm equipment, no? Yung hand tractors, they use fuel. The fishermen, their fishing boats, their bangkas also use fuel. So, I don't know how it would not affect, no? Doon na lang sa mga also, after they transport their finished products, yung palay coming from the Baisia, will be transported to Manila. Vegetable coming from Benguet will be transported to Balintawak. That will cost a lot of fuel. Were you able to do some computations as well on these things?
If I may request the staff to present to Senator Ejercito a very detailed analysis we did, which is being flashed. We did look at very detailed price effect at the agriculture level, by sector, by transportation. It's very difficult to show each of the 100 slides, but can we please send a copy to Senator Ejercito? But in summary, these are the key commodities that low-income people would buy. And we do not find, contrary to popular perception, that prices really will skyrocket. In fact, as I mentioned, with diesel increasing from 18 to 32 pesos between January 2016 and January 2017, we do not see rise at the retail or farm gate and other commodities increase. And as I mentioned, we need to factor many other reasons, such as the good weather, the growing economy, completion of TPLEX, for instance, to bring food to the cities at a lower cost, as the positive factors that will offset this fuel increase. That would be all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Yusek. I hope you you don't mind. We want to be educated also because, of course, we know that you came from a very good school, the same school as my school and Senator Angara's. But unfortunately, we're on the opposite side of the fence right now.
I think he got higher grades than us, Senator J.
I would think so also. Anyway, how do you plan to counter this year? You mentioned earlier may mga poverty mitigation measures. Can you elaborate on how the department plans to implement this?
Well, yes, Mr. Chair. In slide 14, if I may request it to be flashed, for taxpayers, the mitigating measure is really the lower income tax that we are proposing. However, for the bottom 50%, who are typically non-taxpayers because they are minimum wage and below, we are proposing 5 programs to help them cope and so that their welfare will not be affected. And I can explain details later, but let me highlight. The first is we propose to give targeted cash transfer, 200 pesos per month for 1 year to the poorest 50% of households. That will cover 10 million households that are identified by the listahanan. This is to mitigate the temporary but moderate increase in price. This is not the real solution to their poverty, but it is a way to bridge while waiting for the infra and social services, which will make them productive and help them seek livelihood.
Who will be implemented? Which
this
agency?
Is a consortium of DOF, PhilHealth, DILG. We are requesting them to be included, and DSWD together with Land Bank.
But I think the DSWD already opposed had an opposition,
They initially
no?
opposed,
To this
but-
one-year unconditional cash
Yes, they are actually working with us to implement this cash transfer for the CCT beneficiaries. That is their commitment. And then the second, Mr. Chair, is the Pantawid Pasada.
Sige, Yusek Laiko, what's your position?
I'm the
Department's
Secretary
position
for the
this?
Department of Social Welfare and Development, but we'll reserve our position or comment after Yusek Carl. I'd like to comment on our cooperation with the Department of Finance, please.
Proceed.
Please.
The second is the Pantawid Pasada. Should oil prices lead to higher fares, then we will provide subsidies. However, as mentioned, with a significant increase in diesel price last year, LTFRB granted a 1 peso increase. That is why the 3 peso may not warrant. But if it does warrant, we are ready to provide subsidies. The third is cross-subsidy in SPAG areas through the Pantawid Corriente. We have done this before and we can re-implement this. We are discussing with DOE and NAPOCOR as we speak. The third is to provide social welfare cards to the poor and vulnerable as a basis for availing of other targeted subsidies. And the fifth is a public transport modernization so that we can help convert the more inefficient jeeps together with subsidies from the tax reform so that their costs will be minimized.
The indulgence of Senator JV, just a question on the 5 interventions. Are they mutually exclusive or they can be cumulative for a given individual?
Well, they could be cumulative, or rather, they are not mutually exclusive. They can be received because we have subdivided this by mode or groups. So a poor person who happens to ride a jeep, who happens to be in a SPAG area,
All three
we
could possibly,
get all
could
three, yes.
theoretically get all
Correct, Mr. Chair.
three. Okay. Yes, Senator Risa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick follow-up on one of the current points that I requested the Chair, and you graciously agree that sometime during our hearing, we will hear from the National Confederation of Transport Workers Unions on points like that one just raised by Yusek Chua on the public transport modernization. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Risa. Senator JV.
I,
Sorry, Senator Jolon is raising his
Yes.
hand. If it's
Majority
okay,
leader-
if it's all
minority
right
leader,
with
sir.
Senator JV.
I just can you know this protecting the poor and the low-income groups. I am particularly interested in this program of 10 million households, targeted transfers of 200 pesos per month. You know, DSWD at the height of their 4-piece program could only identify 4 million, 4 million households. And I know that there, because I was the chair of the Finance Committee, I know how extensive the infrastructure that was put up. And many of these poor are even just the distribution of the 1,000, I don't recall, 900 or 1,004, 1,000, yes, to the 4 million beneficiaries was a nightmare and was subjected to a lot of criticism about the non-poor getting it, about political favors. And the principal concern, political favors were being dispensed and hindi naman talaga mahirap yung tumatanggap dito. 4 na milyon na household yun. We even had to impose very strict caps and limits on the administrative expense. We capped it at a certain portion, a certain percentage of the total budget, because this goes haywire. Now, in your particular case, you are talking about 10 million households. This is about 50 million people. I mean, at an average of 5 per family. You're talking about 50 million, that's nearly half of the population. Do you think, so, you know, to be credible, tell us that this subsidy is administratively feasible. Otherwise, you, from where we sit, sasabihin na, nabubola na kayo, hindi nyo kayang isang taon gagawin nyo lahat yan. And DSWD, I am sure if they have freedom of speech, if they have freedom to talk, they will have very serious concerns about this. Except that I can understand that, you know, sometimes they don't enjoy that much freedom publicly. But I have very serious doubts, Mr. Chairman, about the ability to protect the poor through providing monthly subsidy for 10 million households at 200 pesos per month. And how much would this total? How much?
25 billion pesos, Mr. Chair. Senator
25 billion pesos for 1 year.
For 1 year, yes.
And what is the administrative expense?
The administrative expense is estimated at 1 billion.
Oh, come on, you're kidding
I
me.
will, if I may explain, Mr. Minority
sige.
Leader,
Sige.
and submit the details.
Yes, because this is one very critical area of your statement that you are returning because of the expected difficulty as a result of the burden on excise of the additional excise tax on fuel. You're saying that this is the response. Subsidy of 200 pesos a month for 10 million households, and you'll only cost 1 billion. Sige
Yes,
nga.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much.
Why also 1 year only? I'm
Yes,
just curious.
I will-
Because the tax is increasing for the 3 years.
Correct. Mr. Chair, first, your question, and I will, if I may explain a little bit on the targeted cash transfer. We firmly believe the real solution to uplifting the lives of the people are through livelihood, social services, and infra. But they have to be budgeted, procured, built. It will take some time. And meanwhile, we have decided that we need a short-term, quick solution to alleviate their concern. That is why we propose a targeted cash transfer for 1 year. And the House version has 4 years. But if I may answer the Minority Leader's very good inquiry, many countries around the world subsidize fuel, such as Indonesia and Malaysia. But when fuel prices reached so high, it became a fiscal cost that cannot be borne anymore. That is why Indonesia, for instance, gradually reduced the subsidy, which used to be 90% of the fuel X price, gradually towards 30%, I believe, today. And every time they removed the fuel subsidy, they provided unconditional cash transfer, only for 1 year. But they did it in 2005, 2008, 2013, and they're doing another round today. If I may, Mr. Chair, Mr. Minority Leader, just give the highlights. In 2018, we proposed in the tax reform to earmark 40% of incremental revenues from oil, or around 29.8 billion, to social mitigating measures. And the TCT, or the targeted cash transfer, is the biggest component. The others are, as I mentioned, the Pantawid, Pasada, Corriente, and so on. And we propose to give a one-time unconditional cash transfer of 2,400 to the poorest 10 million households, or the poorest 50%, in 2 tranches, in January and in May, before the school starts. And this amount is calculated to fully offset the moderate but temporary increase in price that an ordinary household in the bottom 50% will face. As I mentioned, this has been done by Malaysia and Indonesia and many other countries. And to answer the Minority Leader's question, why the admin cost is not necessarily higher than the CCT, is that we are riding on the successful implementation of the NHTS, or the National Household Targeting System, and the current CCT program. And this is the highlight, Mr. Minority Leader. First is we have Listahanan 2015, a survey of the poorest 15 million households done by the SWD in 2015, which provide us the list of poor people by name and address. This means there's no need, like before, to identify the poor. Second, of the 10 million, 4.4 are CCT beneficiaries. This simply requires a top-up, and the current system requires very little cost. And this is similar to the rice subsidy cash top-up, which PhilHealth, which the SWD has been doing. The next is what do we do with the additional 5.6 million who are not CCT beneficiaries but are poor or low income because they have no mothers or children. We propose to ride on the PhilHealth's ID system. PhilHealth, as part of the universal health coverage, is providing IDs to 7.9 million non-CCT families. This is ongoing, and that is why there's also no significant additional cost. The fourth one is Land Bank and DSWD are implementing this for the last 8 years, and there are significant lessons to be learned and can be improved, so we're not starting from scratch. And finally, Mr. Chair, Minority Leader, this is a program with no conditions. Therefore, we do not need people to check their attendance, go to school, or have a checkup. That is why the administrative cost is estimated to be much less than the cost that is being seen in the CCT. And if I may submit a detailed presentation.
Can we have, yes, Mr. Chair, with your permission, can we have a copy of that?
Yeah, please, could you furnish us?
So you're saying that right now, there is a listing containing 15 million poorest of the poor?
Yes, sir.
And
that
this
is
is the National Housing Targeting System?
Household Targeting System.
National Household Targeting
Yes,
System.
sir.
But wasn't this criticized by those who are presently in the cabinet before as politically oriented list?
My understanding, Mr.
Yeah,
Chair,
I mean, those who are now in the cabinet, when they were, when the previous administration was using this, had a list of 4.5 million, 4.4 million for the conditional cash transfer or the 4-piece program, they were saying that this list is politically tainted. Dilawan na daw lahat ng nandun. So yun na gagamitin natin ngayon?
if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please.
And then maybe Yusek Noel can provide details. I understand because we have been meeting the SWD every 2 weeks because we have a technical working group. They took 2 years to validate this 15 million list.
At hindi naman dilawan mga ito, ha?
No, sir.
Okay. Gusto ko lang
There are, Mr. Minority Leader, 270,000, correct me if I'm wrong, the SWD, who complained that they should be part of the list. And that is part of their validation. So I felt that with 270,000, which is not even 5%, the list appears to be a very good form and basis for our protection, social protection.
It's 15 million families,
There are
just to clarify, households. 15
million families. When they did the validation and kamustahan, I believe only 270,000 per the report of Yusek Malutoralde were complained that they should be in the list.
But when we were saying that in the past, members of the cabinet today were saying, you know, there are more than that, etc. This list is flawed, etc. Now you are using precisely this list.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Minority Leader, I do not dispute that this is not a perfect list. There is inclusion and exclusion error.
Yes.
But globally, we have studied this in my previous work, and we do not find a better alternative than this.
I wish your colleagues in government today were saying that, you know, in the past. Because the DSWD under Secretary Suleiman was subjected to all kinds of unfair, politically motivated criticism because of this list. Now you're using this list and you're saying it's valid, it reflects really the listing of the poorest sector of our society. But I still do not buy, and anyway, I look at it, I still do not buy that your administrative cost is only 1 billion to provide subsidy for 10 million households. I do not buy that. I am, you know, if you can submit to me, if you can submit as part of this hearing today, Mr. Chairman, we would like Yusek Chua to submit.
Maybe submit a breakdown, Yusek, please.
Breakdown on how you arrive at 1 billion.
Yes, we have breakdown which we will submit.
Thank you very much. I will not consume
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader.
Mr. Chair, for the
Yeah,
follow-up
Senator Sherwin.
bakit 10 million families, no? And how come it's 50%? Yeah, how come it's 50% poorest? PSA poverty index is around the 21%.
Yes, the poverty rate is 21.6%. And we basically looked at the profile of the average average household based on the family income and expenditure survey, and we find that the poorest 50% generally are not income taxpayers, therefore would have to be helped. But the upper 50% are generally, as a household, income taxpayers and will benefit from the reduction in the income tax rates.
The median income.
The median,
Yung 50%, how much is that household making?
We have that.
But the poverty index is, I think, 21%.
21.6, sir.
How come we're adding another Yeah, almost
Because
30%.
they are considered near poor or low income.
Do you have that income breakdown?
Yes, it is in the...
Are you eye doctors at the DOF?
Sorry?
Are you eye doctors?
Me?
Yeah.
What do you mean, Mr.
It's
Chair?
very small. Your photo.
No, I think it's meant to be
Yeah.
read.
It's meant to be read once every century, maybe.
No, sir. I think I cannot...
I'm very impressed if you can.
No, I have a copy. But my copy was given to the minority leader, so I'm looking for an extra. Where is it? Where is it? Yes, thank you very much, Yusek Lico. The median income, so that will be, as a household, is 19,000 per month as a household. If I may, to give a comparison, the poorest 10% is 5,000 per household. The richest 10% is 111,000 per household. So it's very skewed. The median income is much lower than the average income.
Oh, 111,000, I didn't get that.
The richest 10%.
Ah, I see.
So the poorest 10% is 5,000 plus. The median is 19,000, and the richest 10% is 111,000. Thank you, Yusek.
Mr. Chair, tala.
Yes, I think you still have the floor, Senator JV.
Yusek, Carl, we know that it's very noble, no? It's a campaign promise of the President that the lower income, the lower bracket workers, no, should be exempted from. How many are these? Ilan ba yung targeted na those who would be exempted from the income tax? Yung 250,000 below ba? Annual income?
Well, there are, according to the database of BIR, if I remember correctly, around 12 million registered taxpayers. So they are the beneficiaries. And they represent more or less 1/3 of the labor force of around 30 to 40 million.
So they will be exempted already from
They will
paying
be,
income tax?
well, depending on their income level. If they are below 250,000 per year under our proposal, exempt. But between 250 to 5 million, they will have lower income tax, so they will have higher take-home pay. Above 5 million, they will pay higher.
So how many do you estimate those who will be exempted fully?
Okay, of the 12 million, 83% based on the BIR microdata will be fully exempted initially.
83%, that's about 8 million, probably?
Yes.
8 million workers.
9.9, yes.
9.9 workers.
Including all the minimum wage who are currently exempted.
But during the deliberations, probably when you were putting up the study, did you consider also the effect of your proposal, for example, to those who are not part of the formal economy, the underground economy? Of course, there will be effect in the commodities.
Yes.
I know it's not the topic now, but the sugar, sweetened beverages, Mr. Chairman, sari-sari stores, carinderias, sidewalk vendors, I think 40% of their sales are beverages, and definitely they will also take a hit.
Yes.
And I think there are about 1.3 to 1.4 million sari-sari stores nationwide. I don't have the data right now, but there are also a lot of sidewalk vendors, ambulant vendors, and that probably would. Did you take this into account while you were discussing all of this? That's about 15.6. Probably in formal economy, it's about 38% of our labor force, if I'm not mistaken.
Mr. Chair, I won't go to the details, but page 38 of the slide has the comparison, overall impact. But let me highlight two things. The first is some people say that minimum wage and other wage workers below it will not be benefiting. But in truth, we have already exempted them and in advance since 2008. But what do we do with the rest of the taxpayers working hard who have been paying so high? That is why this is like the second installment of the 2008 law, which exempted minimum wage. Number two is, it's not true that the self-employed, even the small ones, are exempted. They are required to pay tax. However, of course, compliance is low. I'm assuming, of course, we will have better citizens paying taxes, so they will benefit. It's not true that sari-sari store will be affected. We would like to say that this overall package should be seen together with the services that we would like to provide to make them, their lives even better.
The reason I asked, probably I just asked again later on, Mr. Chair, because earlier I was walking along, I saw ambulant vendors selling the beverages. I told myself, these people might be affected. That, ang sabi ko nga now that the president is, the priority is war against drugs, and I'm hoping that your proposal will not affect them because, at least they are trying to make a living out of selling these beverages and other commodities. Ang sabi ko, these are potential. Kung sakaling mawalan trabaho to, these are also potential criminals and probably drug pushers. So I'm hoping that we have also considered the effect of this might have an effect on this on our underground economy as well, Mr. Chair. So I'll just ask my questions again later. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator JV. Any other of our colleagues who would care to ask questions? Yeah, Senator Risa.
Thank you, Chair. Yusek Chua, I'm very interested in your 10 key messages, and maybe I have just a couple of questions about two of them. Sabi niyo po that the Petroleum Product Excise Tax is very progressive. Pero just to return to the DSWD position paper, the DSWD pointed out that the increase in oil expenditures of the richest, 10%, will be about 4,300 pesos or 41%. But the increase of oil expenditure of the poorest, 80%, will be to the magnitude of about 4,500 pesos or 43%. So proportionally larger for those who can afford this less. So how then would you square that with claiming that fuel excise tax is progressive? And just additionally on that point, okay, well, I'll get to that later because you started talking about best practices in Indonesia. So I'm also interested in fuel taxation programs in other countries, including lower income countries. So that's my first question, Yusek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Senator Ontiveros, for this very good inquiry. The first is, I would like to say that when we prepared the tax reform, we committed to providing very evidence-based analysis. We looked at the Family Income and Expenditure Survey, a survey done by the Philippine Statistics Authority every 3 years. It's a 78-page survey that can be finished in 6 hours, which has very detailed consumption items, and 50,000 households is a sample. But only around 36,000, I believe, completes a survey because it's too long. And this is a basis. We find that the richest 10% consume 51% of fuel products and transportation costs. And the richest 1%, or 200,000 families, consume already 13% of fuel products and transportation costs. And the 13% is the same share consumed by the bottom 50%. And the simple reason, Madam Senator, is the richest 20% have cars, and many cars. And every time they put a full tank, it's 2,000 more or less today. Whereas everyone else would commute and pay up to 20 pesos per day or 100 pesos per week. But only 30% of the fare price is really attributable to the diesel. That is why the tax is really progressive. If we keep the current system, yes, we do protect the poor. However, it is basically subsidizing the rich far more than protecting the poor. That is why in our proposal, we are proposing to look at the reform as a package, because while we are increasing the excise tax to address environment, health, and equity considerations, we are also giving back to the poorest 50% their due share of the tax. So this is the redistributive part. That is why we believe that although there are many ways to think about the impact of the tax, we think this is really progressive if we look at it as a package. The second, Mr. Chair, Madam Senator, is we looked at, if we can go to slide 17, 18, and 2019, we looked at around the world countries and their excise tax rates as a share of retail price. And we find that, for instance, compared to more countries around the region in other areas, we find that the average share of oil excise to retail price is at least 25%, all the way to 45%. Philippines today, for gasoline, is less than 10%. In the next slide, the share of diesel excise to retail price in the Philippines is 0, despite being the dirtier fuel. Even in countries like India, various states levy on average 20+% share of excise tax to retail price, whereas in the Philippines, diesel is 0, even if India is far poorer, because there are other considerations such as health, environment, and equity. And that is why, Mr. Chair, Madam Senator, this is, I think, the proposal is reasonable and comparable with other countries.
I appreciate that, Yusek Chua, but it seems that the statistics you are presenting to show that the fuel excise tax is progressive refer more to the consumption of the highest 10% and the lowest, and then the poorest 80%, the richest 10% and the poorest 80% in our society. But I'm pointing out from my interpretation of the DSWD position that the concern is the impact on the the spending capacity of those families and the impact on their quality of life. Differentiated po ang impact ng higher consumption for 10% of the richest families who can well afford increased consumption, at saka yung impact ng ganyang consumption on the poorest 80%, given the increase in the excise tax. So yun po yung punto ko, and I would like to return to that as the whole Senate continues to study the complete package, as you properly call it. Before I move on to my next question, I just want to point out a further point that interested me in the DSWD position paper. Sabi po nila that farmers and fisherfolk will be hard hit by the increase in excise tax as they depend on petroleum products as input for their production. And speaking of the experiences of other countries, in China, for example, efforts to impose a fuel tax have been strongly opposed by the National People's Congress, the ruling party there, and largely also out of concern for the impact on farmers. So pangalawa po, natanong Yusek Chua. You said that the fuel excise, regarding the fuel excise tax, that many factors affect price. Yes, weather and at least a couple of others that you mentioned. Pero syempre, yung tax, as it affects price, that is something na mas in control ng isang gobyerno, as the executive is asking Congress to now pass. Compared to weather, hindi naman natin makontrol yan. Looking at the notes from our Senate Economic Planning Office, or SEPO, so they remind us that petroleum products are price sensitive, and then there will also be an impact on transportation, household spending, manufacturing, commerce, food production, and local tourism. And again, speaking about transportation, the NCTU is here among other transport organizations and probably would like to make an input about that. But my question, as pointed out, back to the DSWD again, won't this adversely affect our industrial and fisheries sectors? I missed something there, but I'll go back to that later. So that first part of my second question first, Yusek Chua.
Question addressed to the DSWD?
To Yusek Chua still, in terms of the impact of the tax on prices, since petroleum products are price sensitive, and that price sensitivity will translate into impacts on various other sectors of our economy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Senator. Indeed, these are very important questions. Just to put on record, we'd like to provide your office with a copy of this very detailed analysis, product by product, group by group, sector by sector, types of transport and food items. But if I may just summarize very quickly what we find. Previous slide. There are many estimates floating around, DOF, DSWD, BSP, and all these require complicated methodologies, which are very difficult to compare. So I decided, Madam Senator, Mr. Chair, just to highlight what really happened last year, because this is something we cannot dispute. It is fact, and everyone experienced this. Diesel increased from 18 peso to 32 pesos between January 2016 and January 2017. We would, under our impression that everything will increase by 76%, which is the growth of 18 peso to 32. However, in general, our overall price level did not increase.
Miss Earth.
Opo,
Kasi
my apologies.
she's a medical physicist who's also spent considerable time studying, and Dr. Chu has also spent a lot of time perfecting.
Ang last po na evidence na gusto po namin, wag po natin, magkaroon lang po tayo ng caution na when we think that we can, I want to be careful with my words here. I was going to say play with prices. Hindi po. Gamitin ang presyo para mag-raise ng pondo. Gawin po nating aral kung ano ang nangyayari ngayon sa Venezuela. Ang Venezuela ay Venezuela rode on the economic gains from high increasing prices of oil. But when the world market was able to learn how to cope, and I think that is what's going to happen to our economy, when you start playing with fire with prices, when the economy, when the consumers learn how to behave, you may not be able to collect the kind of revenues that you think you will be able to gain because you tinkered with our tax structure. Thank you po.
I think Venezuela is a different case altogether because they put all their eggs in one basket, no? And that's the oil basket. And so when the prices collapsed, talagang tinamaan sila. And secondly, it just shows that maybe autarky or a command economy doesn't really work, and you have to rely on the free market to dictate prices, supply and demand. So I think it's a bit remote, no? That will be in a Venezuelan case study. But I think Senator Risa wants to put some things on record.
Thank you, Chair. I have about half a dozen more questions sana, primarily for you, Sec. Chua.
Please go ahead, you can put them on the record.
Okay, I offer this in the interest of time, at least maisabi ko sa ating mga resource persons, and then as the Chair has called to hear our more than 30 resource persons, if you would care, we would appreciate if you would care to address any of these questions that I'll put on record. Thank you, Chair. So, and I want to assure you, Sec. Chua, that the Senate committee really values evidence-based. I mean, that's supposed to be our core business, is evidence-based policy making. So we value very much the inputs that all of you make. And we've noticed, for example, with great interest yung sinagawa ng mga scientists of the world in the recent March of Scientists of the World, na what's going on, all of this policy making around the world na not based on evidence. So, but just to put some other things on record, I failed to note earlier na interesante din sa position paper ng DSWD yung babala nila na without the cash transfer, and in any case it's proposed to last only a year, the take-home pay of the poorest 4 deciles will decrease. So that's something that we really have to address, no, in considering this strain. Tapos speaking of evidence-based, kasi hindi ko pasensya kung kinukulit ko pa rin yung tanong na how sure are we that with the proposed mitigating measures maduduplicate yung parang magaan lang na impact nung previous petroleum excise tax increase, especially on the poor. Kasi there may have been another factor at work na hindi pa natin pinag-uusapan. Kasi when there's, for example, a 14 peso shock on diesel, the Monetary Board tries to rein in the inflation by a monetary policy. So, isn't it possible that the resulting inflation, na sinasabi nyo ay magaan lamang, was already masked by the Monetary Board? So might we then doubt that the inference might be flawed, that fuel price increases hardly cost inflation. Just to continue in sa thesis nyo na let's look at all of this as a package. So just to put on record, Mr. Chair, yung iba kong mga tanong na sana matugunan ng ating mga iba't ibang resource persons dito. Some are basic lang, just to provide us the background picture. So what's the current size of the market for petroleum products in the Philippines? How much of this is imported and how much is produced or at least processed locally? Pangalawa, how much of this is consumed by the richest 3 deciles? So related sa tanong ko kanina, consumption versus impact on the quality of life of the family. How much of this is consumed by the richest 3 deciles, by the poorest 3 deciles? Pangatlo, how elastic is local demand for petroleum products? Pang-apat, in the event higher excise taxes incentivize people to consider alternatives. For me, very interesting, Mr. Chair, both the social and the ecological aspects of this petroleum excise tax. In the event that people are incentivized to consider alternatives, how developed are our alternative and renewable energy sectors? Do we have an estimate how much migration from the use of petroleum products there will be? Panlima, there will be an annual increase in the excise tax from the moment this tax package is passed, if it is passed. However, targeted transfers will only be provided for 1 year. So what's the rationale for not continuing these remedial measures until the last tranche of the scheduled increases? Na itanong na rin ni Yusek Leco. I have already asked my next 2 questions, Mr. Chair. So last question is in relation to the tinatanong din ni Minority Leader kanina sa remedial packages. Instead of a blanket 40% allocation for targeted transfers, which will only last a year sa ngayon, and 60% for infra, health, education, and social protection, would the DOF consider amending this provision by referring to specific programs for affected sectors? Which I think, Mr. Chair, segues to hearing the different, well, earmarking and you hearing our different resource persons, including from the different basic sectoral organizations. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Teresa, would you care to give a response, Yusek?
Yes, I would like to just say a few things. First, I would like to say that unfortunately, if you, Madam Senator, take time to look at the big documentation, most of the questions are answered there. But I would like to highlight that first, this policy making is really difficult. We cannot balance everything. If the solution is to please everyone, we'll just lower taxes for everyone. But in the long term, we have no money for public services. So it's really a very delicate balancing. That is why we propose that let's look at the reform as a package. Within package 1, let's look at both the reduction in personal income, but also the broadening of our consumption taxes. And within the program of tax reform, we look at the rest of the packages, which would address the wealth taxes. And within the fiscal program, let's look at how the money will be spent. And I think if we look at this more holistically, it will be easier to understand how the poor will benefit. On monetary policy, we'll confirm with BSP, but indeed that will be a tool that could be used to manage inflation. But I have not seen the interest rates adjusted in the last year, but BSP can confirm. And then on the 1 year or 4 years or the earmarking, again, this is also something that we are, of course, open to discussing. In fact, we agreed in the meeting with the economic managers to have more specific earmarking down to the program. So we are in discussion with DBM about this. And we really want to assure the public that money will be put into good use. And if it's needed to earmark and to present it in more detail, we're open to do that. However, the budget, I think, is the proper document to itemize the details. And earmarking the tax can be more generic. But of course, it's open to discussion. Finally, I want to make a statement on the renewable energy. Everything is relative price. Renewable energy will not kick off if we exempt diesel or the fossil fuel, and thereby making renewable energy far more expensive. So by promoting so if we want to promote renewable energy, I think the solution is not only to give more incentives and subsidies and freebies, but also to adjust and make the fossil fuel, I think Ms. Earth will agree, to make them more expensive so that there will be a gradual shift. Many countries have put 2030, I believe, as the target wherein no car should be running on fossil fuel. And if we continue to exempt diesel, we will be the last to be able to achieve that. The rest, Madam Chair, if I may refer you, in the interest of time, to the documentation. Thank you, ma'am.
Salamat, Mr. Chair. Lastly, from me at this point, certainly I will make the time to read all your documentation justifying this proposed train. And may I reassure the good Yusek Chua that the committee is not trying to please everyone. As policymakers and even as politicians, alam namin, you cannot, it's a fruitless effort to try to please everyone. Pero kailangang i-disaggregate natin yung burdens at saka yung benefits sa iba't ibang mga sektor sa loob ng mga malalaki at importanteng statistics natin. Kasi there will be winners and losers in different parts of the package. Kailangan namin himayin yung bawat isa. I do share in the spirit of trying to seek in the long term a more progressive, a socialized tax system sa halip na yung regressive na nakikita natin in many aspects. At hindi ko pa, babasahin ko lahat ng documentation nyo kasi hindi ko pa nakikitang progressive pa ito. But maraming salamat sa mga inputs ninyo pareho. Salamat.
Mr. Chairman, may I be recognized?
Who is this?
I'm Lino Marable, sir.
May order ho tayo. Mamadali ho ba kayo? May date ho ba kayo?
Susundo lang po ako sa Tineo.
Ha? Ano po?
I have to fetch my son sa Tineo.
Ganon. Sige, sabihin niyo lang ho. What sector do you represent ho?
Sa transport po.
Transport, okay.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to...
I was going to ask the body to keep your comments to 3 to 5 minutes so we can hear everybody.
Yes, I will do that, sir.
Please. Thank you. As much as possible.
First of all po,
kasi babasahin naman namin yung mga position papers ninyo.
Okay.
So.
Isabit na po namin. At first of all po, gusto naming i-commend si Yusek yung dalawang
yung mga comment. Tsaka bati-bati. Huwag na po yun. Yung diretso na po sa position.
Going straight to the point, I'd like to invite the attention of Yusek Kua na sinasabi niya ay ang gumagamit ng gasolina at mga oil ay yung mga rich people. May invite your attention that there are about 8 million vehicles in the Philippines as of 2015, 3 million of which are private cars. Okay, hindi po lahat noon ay sa mayaman. Marami po ang pag-aari ng mahihirap at average citizen. Meron po tayong 4 na milyon na tricycle at saka solo rider. So, yan po lalong-lalo na yung ating mga PUBs at saka mga malalaking truck. Gumagastos po yan. At ang bilang po niyan ay 1 milyon. Gumagastos po yan ng minimum 30 liters a day, ha? 30 liters a day. So multiply that by 1 million, that's a lot, no? Plus the about 2 million private cars na apektado yung mga ordinaryong tao. So, what I'm trying to say is that it is not the monopoly of the rich people who are using more oil, no? Kami po ay nandoon sa maraming porsyento, malaking porsyento na gumagamit ng oil. 30 litro kada araw, minimum po yan. Yung iba 40, yung iba 50, depende sa aming ruta. So, I'd like to invite the attention of the good Yusek. And secondly, ako po kanina nagdaan sa palengke where a lot of people, mga 80% ng ating mamamayan goes to the public market. Noong pong Enero, ang presyo po ng galunggong ay 100 piso. Ngayon po 120 na. Yung malalaki po 140. Mabuti po yung bawang, bumaba na. Yung pong sibuyas, dati po 60, ngayon 75 na. So, what I'm trying to illustrate here, ladies and gentlemen, is that the increase of inflation, even before the excise tax, is already there. And how much more if the excise tax will be included? Lahat po ito, gaya ng sabi natin, ay isinasakay ito sa mga sasakyan. Kasama na po ang mga Peacer folks na numbering 1.2 million, napakadami pong gasolina ang aming ginagastos dyan na kung ipagpapatuloy po natin at bigyan ng mataas na tax itong ating mga ginagamit sa pampasahero at saka pangingisda, pagdadala ng gulay dito sa ating public market, ay marami pong mahirap na tatamaan. It is the commuters and it is the poorest of the poor who will be badly affected by this proposal. Kami po, hindi po naman kami tumatanggi. We are not opposing the economic plans of the President, only sana po huwag kaming ihandog sa altar ng kahirapan para matupad lamang ang plano ng ating gobyerno. Maraming pong salamat.
Your group is a transport group, ho?
That's right po.
Transport group, ho?
But lahat po ng nasa transportasyon ay amin pong sinasama dito po sa aming request sa committee ito na kami po ay pagbigyan at tingnan po ang talagang mangyayari at epekto. Gaya po sabi ng USEC ng DSWD, yung pong epekto dito sa nakakaraming mahihirap ay napakalaki. Yung 10 to 15% increase in inflation rate is very, very conservative. Citing the examples, pupunta po tayo sa palengke. Kung pupunta po tayo sa palengke, wag tayo magdadala ng media. Kasi po, hindi magsatapat ng totoo yung mga tindera sa palengke. Magbalat kayo po tayo. At dyan po, we will be able to determine really the prices of commodities in the public market. And lastly, and this is a small request, lahat po ng public utility vehicle ay na-exempt ang bus, ang taxi at jeep. Wala na po raw excise tax. At maliban po sa UB Express. Ang UB Express po ay public utility vehicle din na sinasakyan ng mga young professionals, hindi nila dinadala yung kanilang mga sasakyan. At kung maaari po, pakiusap po sa committee ito at kay USEC Kuwa, na isama na rin kami sa exemption. Wag po sana natin, gusto po namin sabihin na kami hindi naniniwala, na meron tinititigan at may tinitingnan. Gusto po namin maging kasama. At ituring din kami na nasa public utility service na naglilingkod sa mga pasahero araw-araw. Maraming pong salamat.
Salamat ho. Anong view niyo ho dun sa proposed transfers, yung Pantawid Pasada?
Ay gaya po ng bulungan namin din ay napakaliit po. Ay baka po yung 5 litro lamang, ay hindi po naman, baka yun po ay mga isang ikot lang ng aming mga sasakyan, no?
What is the amount, Yusek, for the Pantawid Pasada? And the
we have,
number of beneficiaries?
Mr. Chair, we have allocated, I think, 800 or 977 million to all duly registered and franchised public utility vehicles. Only if the prices of fares will increase.
Mr. Chair, just like that,
Mr.
Yusek,
Chair,
how do you plan to go about this, yung system? Kasi kung if you were to count all of the PUVs, medyo parang we just want to know how.
This is the 3rd time we might have to do it again. So Pantawid Pasada was last implemented 2011 by DOE. They distributed cash cards to the jeeps and tricycles who are franchised and registered. I will not dispute that there are issues, but the solution is not to abandon the idea just because there are some issues. It's to make it happen and work early to improve the system po.
Okay, thank you. Can we hear from Dr. Victor Abola? When he was called last time, he already left. Is he still around? Dr. Abola. Yeah, we'd like to hear from you because we want to also hear the other economists who may have similar or dissimilar views.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished senators, Honorable Secretary, Minority Party Leader Drilon, Senator Ejercito, Senator Hontiveros. I would just like to, based on our studies, in principle, in general, we agree with the ideas that have been presented by the DOF. These are based on sound economic principles, tax principles, as well as supported by good empirical data. We might have some methodological differences, but in general, I focused more on the income tax giveaway, because that at the root of it is we are raising excise taxes because we are lowering the income tax. And the proposal is to start the tax at 250,000 pesos a month, which will leave only among the existing taxpayers only 17% who will pay. And we did some exercise, and we got to something that is quite reasonable. It's also a win-win situation in which we give away, but less, but benefiting all of those who are supposed to be beneficiaries in the DOF proposal, which is to lower the threshold to 150,000. In so doing, we will be able to retain 52% of the existing taxpayers, which is very important for us, in our view, to have what is so-called a broad-based taxation system. And will be the basis for the future, that this will be our taxpayers in the future. If we exempt them now, well, they don't get into the habit of paying their taxes, and the feeling of empowerment may be lessened. Okay.
What is your proposed tax rate for those between 150 and or 150 and above?
Our proposed tax rate starts at 5%. Really, it's quite small, but it's cumulative, so that those above 250,000 will have an effective rate a bit higher than what was proposed by the DOF. To give an example, in our estimations that between 150 and 250,000, the taxpayers in this bracket will still have an net income gain because of the lower taxes between 14.4 to 16%. Concretely, if we want to put it in the example also of the DOF, for Clerk 4, the present tax system makes them pay 7,282 on a gross income, monthly income 15,368. This is about 3.2% of the effective rate. So in the DOF proposal, this will be zero tax exempt. In our proposal, they will have to pay 1,188 or an effective rate of 0.5%, which is small, but they are numerous. In the other example, which is 21,000 for call center agents, we got the present tax is 21,867, and that's about 8% of their income. And DOF will exempt that, so they will get 21,000 higher net income because the tax is lessened. In our proposal, it's increased slightly from 5 then to 10.
Maybe no need to go into the minute
so
details. Maybe I understand you have a submission. I'll share it with the DOF and my colleagues. And what is the overall revenue impact of your proposal?
The overall impact of our proposal is that, as I said, 52% will remain as taxpayers, will not be exempt.
In terms of pesos?
In terms of pesos, it's close to 50 billion pesos will be saved by the national government. We believe that this is important to keep because a lot of the figures that we are citing, although they are the best we can come out with, and I'm sure the DOF has done a lot of work on that, is that it's better to err on the safe side. In these cases, especially when we are slashing tax that we are collecting right now. What we will collect, we don't really know exactly. So we better be more careful, more conservative, at the same time that we are still providing the benefits to the middle income class and the transfers for the poor income class. I note also that by lowering the tax relief for the low and middle income class by 50 billion, it will also be a buffer for, I would call, the softer measures for revenue, which are tax administration measures and complementary measures, which total 109 billion. I would rather, I would think, err on the conservative side, as long as we're providing still benefits to the good part of the population. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Professor Bola. We appreciate the work you put in. For the record, we invited about a dozen other economists, but it's only Dr. Abola who took up our invitation. Thank you, sir. Can we hear from Engineer Jose Logarta from the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities?
Thank you, Mr. Senator. My colleague in ICSC, Dr. Angelos Angeles, will read from our paper.
Thank you. I am a natural resource and environmental economist, and my colleague is an energy economist. So we now have three economists who are offering their opinion. The ICSC, or the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, appreciate the intent of both the DOF proposal and the Senate draft bills. We would like to focus our comments on tax reforms that pertain to fossil fuels and inevitably with respect to renewable energy sources. Number one, we would like to call your attention to the fact that there is no longer any leaded gasoline in the country, but there is reference to this in 2 Fs in the draft Senate bills. The full phase-out of leaded gasoline was already effected on December 23, year 2000, pursuant to the provisions of the Clean Air Act of 1999. The Department of Energy, however, still has to act to dispel this misperception by doing away with the term unleaded label. What the authors probably mean in the draft is regular lower octane gasoline. So a correction needs to be made. Second, we disagree with the tax on diesel, pegged at 3 pesos per liter. Yes, it is an increase from nothing, but it should be the same level as gasoline. While diesel engines are more thermally efficient, they emit 40% more carbon dioxide per kilometer, receive 30% less carbon dioxide per kilometer. Science says that they emit more, 4 to 10 times toxic pollutants, like nitrous oxides or NOx, the one that makes you sleepy when you're caught in traffic, and particulate matter, large and fine, which hurts our health, much more than gasoline cars. Number 3, concerns have been raised on the impact of taxes on diesel for high-speed turbo generators and bunker for low-speed engines, on the electricity rates in the small island grids, we have many, that are served with the small power utilities group of the NAPO Corps and the private power providers. Taxes on these fuels should serve to accelerate the hybridization of generation systems in these islands. That makes financial and socio-economic sense. Hybridization means integrating variable renewable energy, or VRE sources, into existing diesel systems. This makes financial sense because the average costs of hydro, wind, and solar energy are already lower than the variable costs, mainly of diesel generation. This means that even after paying for capacity costs of the thermal sets, the average cost of the systems altogether are reduced, leading to lower cost of generation and therefore lower charges for missionary electrification. This is a win for almost all stakeholders. Yet, while it is equitable, economically sensible, and already specified by the rather old Electric Power Industry Reforms Act, or EPIRA to install for NSOG or NSUG to install renewable energy systems which are feasible, this mandate has yet to be fulfilled. It's in the Act, it has not yet been fulfilled. Even in the short run, many island power systems are better served by 100% renewable energy systems with viable renewable energy and storage. ICSC has recently been assured by the Battery Department of AES, the world's leader in utility-scale storage and the owner-operator of the Masinloc coal power plant, that storage costs are already low to make 100% of VRE financially viable. The revised taxes would make that push towards VRE faster. Item 4, relatedly, there should also be no preferential treatment of bunker fuel. All fuels should be taxed. Number 5, we are dismayed that while we propose to tax diesel and bunker used for power generation, there is no tax yet proposed for coal. Now we learn it's in the next package. Coal is the most toxic of all of all fossil fuels. Okay, on fuel marking, the ICSC recommends that the DOF coordinate with the DOE on implementing the rules, because it's the DOE who has the institutional capacity to do this. So some collaboration with the earlier proposal of the DOF. Meanwhile, the oppositors to tax reform contend that any tax increase on refined petroleum products and associated electricity rate increases are anti-poor. We do not agree with that proposition. Instead, we support the assertion of the Department of Finance that the poor can be better helped through improved targeting of poverty alleviation programs instead of subsidizing pollutive behavior. The lifeline rate system can also be redesigned. It's already there to shield the poorest of the poor. It's more connected with more poor. We remind everybody too that the poor in fact suffer most from health impacts of pollution and also suffer most from the impacts of climate change. These oppositors likewise continue to stick to the old protectionist argument that cheap energy and electricity are key to economic development, meaning manufacturing sector expansion. But this is not the only factor that influences our country's comparative advantage, and Yusek Chua has mentioned the other factors. In sum, ICSC commend the DOF and the authors of the Senate bill for taking this visionary initiative. There are historical precedents for this, such as the differential tax on gasolines, or different lead content that we already had in the late 90s, while we transitioned to unleaded gasoline in the year 2000. The 1999 Clean Air Act also provided for market-based instruments to curb pollution, but these still have not been fully implemented. We urge the DNR, which is not here, the DOE, the DOF, to please review the provisions of the Clean Air Act. Still, we say that the extant Senate bill needs to be enacted quickly. We would also like in the future to offer our insights and services to the committee when some discussion on carbon taxation will be conducted. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. De Los Angeles. Can we hear from Ms. May Buenaventura from the Freedom from Debt Coalition?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone. Kami po sa civil society, particularly the Freedom from Debt Coalition, nagsagawa ng maiksing pagkilo sa labas kanina to raise our concerns over this, the excise taxes on oil and petroleum products. At ito rin siguro ay sagot din sa huling nagsalita. Kung nakita nyo sa mga placards, nakalagay anti-people and anti-poor. At ito po ay hindi dahil ino-oppose namin ang pagbabago sa pagbubuwis, which we think is very important. Ang pagbubuwis ay instrumento ng for budget reforms, bringing budget reform para makinabang mahihirap. At the same time, instrumento din siya for what we call climate justice dahil we are one of the most climate-threatened countries in the world. And taxation can be used as an instrument to change behavior that moves us away from the use of dirty energy or fossil fuels and towards more renewables. Pero ang sinasabi lang po namin ay ito po ay kailangan natin isagawa na iniisip natin, so also with our appeal to the good senators in the Senate, to think very carefully about the House Bill 5636 at hindi naman sana ipasa ng ganun kabilis dahil posibleng marami itong implikasyon na na-raise na rin ng mga ibang tao kanina dun sa, lalo na sa mahihirap, yung cascading effects nito sa presyo. At pangalawa, kailangan din pag-aralan yung difficulties ng cash transfers na minumungkahi dahil na rin dun sa mga ni-raise, no? At kami ay nag-agree dun sa mga puntong ni-raise ni Senator Drilon and also from the DSWD. And actually, maybe we think simply, but it really puzzles us why we develop policy that needs safety nets in the first place. Bakit collateral damage ang mahihirap sa pagsagawa ng policy? Pwede bang isang policy na hindi mangangailangan ng safety nets at the onset to begin with? At pangatlo, yamang tinawag din naman itong Comprehensive Tax Reform Program. Sa aming pangunawa, kung comprehensive nga talaga yan, we should also look at the other tax revenue issues by which we are losing a lot of money. So maraming potential revenues na forgone sa iba't ibang paraan at nabanggit na rin yata yung incentives. We have 14 or more investment promotion agencies na hindi naman coherent, no, na from as has been pointed out by former BIR Commissioner. At meron ding napakaliit na tax sa mining and the minerals are being irretrievably lost. At syempre meron din yung dumadami nating tax treaties na I think there's more than 40 already. Now we give preferential rates to other countries and actually discriminate against the domestic businesses. So ang sinasabi lang namin, hindi kami tumututol sa tax reform, pero kailangan ito ay isaalang-alang ang magiging epekto, kaya kailangan pag-isipan mabuti at pag-aralan mabuti at wini-welcome namin yung ganitong pagkakataon. At minumungkahi din namin na tingnan itong iba't ibang mga loopholes na kailangan nating i-plug in the first place, and the Freedom from Debt Coalition has several materials on this by which we can look at the revenues that we are lost. As narinig ko sa radyo ng isang araw sa technical smuggling lamang, magkano ngayon? Mahigit 2 million a day ba? So, for tax to be truly an instrument for social justice, which we believe na gano'n ang aming position, and in most law schools, sasabihin nila, sabi kanina, we cannot choose who to tax. But in law schools, nituro yun na ang isa sa mga principles ng tatlong E ay equity, no? Equity is of administration and efficiency, but most of all, equity. So, yun ang isang recognized na prinsipyo in any tax reform. And I think that should be an overriding principle as we go into this process. Maraming salamat.
Thank you. Can we hear from Mr. Teodoro Reyes from the Petroleum Institute of the Philippines?
Afternoon, distinguished members of the Senate who are in this committee today, Senator Angara and the rest of the senators here. I guess the points of the University of Asia and the Pacific study has been raised with Dr. Abola and Mr. Balbiaran here. We would like to call the attention of our distinguished senators that there is probably an oversight on the price of LPG. It is the price of LPG as LPG as mentioned in the bill, still takes the rates of 3 pesos, 2 pesos, and 1 peso in the 3-year implementation. This is 6 pesos per liter, and this is per liter. In the same rates as the other fuels, especially diesel. 3 pesos per liter for LPG is almost 6 pesos per kilogram, and we buy our households, our mothers, and the rest of the households which procure LPG, buy it in an 11 kg per kilogram basis. So a 6 peso increase is equivalent to 12 pesos per kilogram, or 6 pesos per liter is equivalent to 12 pesos per kilogram, and this is about 130 pesos per 11 kg cylinder. This is not inclusive yet of the effect of VAT. So if you take the impact of VAT of about 12%, this is about 140, 145 pesos per 11 kg cylinder, which is quite burdensome to the households. I guess it's an oversight. All the other points as far as our recommendation on the rates of the fuel, on the rates of the specific tax for fuels have been thoroughly articulated and mentioned in the position paper that we have submitted to the Senate Ways and Means Committee. Our position on the fuel marking will be discussed later when we go to that portion on the fuel marking. Thank you, Senator.
Do you have a counter proposal for the LPG, because you singled LPG out? So, meron ba kayong
Senator Angara, our point here is like kerosene, LPG is used by our common households, not necessarily the rich. Of course, the 3-to-1, which is equivalent to, I mentioned, about 140 pesos per 11 kg is too much. So I guess if they want to price it at par with the diesel, that should really be 3 pesos. It should be 3 pesos cumulative, not 6 pesos cumulative in the 3 years. So that it will be 3 pesos per liter cumulative, equivalent to only 6 pesos per kilogram cumulative, not 12 pesos per kilogram. In fact, we have been requesting in the position if we can exempt LPG and kerosene in the tax structure. But of course, if the Department of Finance would go for a taxing LPG, then the proposal of a 3-to-1 peso per liter, which I have already mentioned as 12 pesos per kilogram, will be too much. So I guess the minimum, the most likely, I guess, is half of the 3-to-1 to arrive at the 6 pesos cumulative per liter, and not the 3-to-1 per kilogram per liter, equivalent to 12 pesos per kilogram, which is about 140 pesos, including VAT, for an 11 kg cylinder.
Proposal to go to 3-to-1.
If it's 3-to-1 per liter, as in the law, then the relatively acceptable one is the half of that. So it's 151 and 50 centavos or whatever. But it should be half of the 3-to-1 or 6 aggregate. So that the total will be 6 pesos per kilogram, not 12 pesos per kilogram. There is a misnomer there. There is a misnomer, sir, that they probably thought that the liter is equivalent to a kilogram.
Okay.
The equivalent of that is double.
Yeah. Yusek, do you have any view on that? How much is the revenue loss from LPG and kerosene? Has it been segregated? Yeah.
Would you like it now, or
yes, please, if you have it.
Check. Maybe I'll just put.
Yeah, I'll ask the next person. Then you can. I will get back to you, Yusek. Can we now hear from the transport sector? We have with us, wala na si Mr. Villarasa of the Federation of Ayala Center Terminals. Can we hear from Attorney Yves Gonzalez of Uber? Yeah. Attorney? Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting us. On the part of Uber, our only statement is that similar to other goods and services that have petroleum as a key cost driver, we believe that any additional excise tax will likely increase the cost for our partners, which will likely lead to an adjustment in fares due to the market dynamics.
We have, could we itemize it? I'm just curious, no? Like, what's the most common ride? Is it Makati to Quezon City or something like that? Or what's the average ride, cost of a ride?
Average cost of a ride right now ranges between 150 to 200 pesos.
That's the most common,
Yes,
150 to 200. That covers how many kilometers usually?
That's usually about 5 kilometers.
Okay. So how will that change? Yung ganon. Have you done the computations?
Not yet,
Or
Mr.
if you could, maybe in case you do it, could you submit it to us?
Yes,
Just
Mr.
to,
Chairman.
so we can operationalize and see it on a daily basis. Let's say that's your daily commute. How much will it go up by?
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr.
Attorney.
Chair. Mr. Chair, Yusek Carl.
Yusek.
Ayan, no, just to quickly provide the answer, of the 74.4 expected increase in the excise from the 3 peso, 7.5 billion will come from LPG. And this has been adjusted accordingly, converting from liters to kilogram, depending on the how it's sold.
But the kerosene was also raised.
Kerosene is very small, 400 million. It's very few people now use kerosene. In fact, most of the poor from the survey shows that they use wood and charcoal more than. Yeah. But if I may quickly comment, Mr. Chair, a while ago the Colonel and the Uber stakeholder said that this will raise price. However, the Colonel also said their customers are YPs, and those who ride Uber have credit cards. These are taxpayers who will benefit from the income tax reduction. So I would like to emphasize again to look at it as a package. Yes, fares will increase. However, they will benefit far more from the income tax reduction.
Thank you. Can we hear from Mr.
Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'll add something because
Can you keep it
just
brief?
a comment for Mr. Chua, Yusek Chua. So
Yeah. Can you keep it brief? Oh?
Yes, sir. Yusek Chua mentioned that it has been corrected, but I am basing my comment on the wording in the bill, which is still 3 pesos to 1 per liter.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll take a look at that now.
And also we would like to request the Senate members of the Ways and Means Committee if we can take a revisit of the jet fuel marking, because if we are going to adopt the higher tax, then that might make the country very uncompetitive as far as the tourism, whether local or domestic.
You're referring to aviation fuel?
Aviation
fuel?
Yes, sir. That will
representatives from the tourism industry here. Yeah, Palace here. What do you say to that?
Mr. Chair. Thank you
What's
for
the
inviting
fuel cost for your company? Of the plane ticket, magkano doon ang fuel cost?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I believe during the last public hearing.
I remember there's a 29% figure. Is it the same for you?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ito Cebu Pacific eh. Kayo?
For us, Mr. Chair, I believe your question, the last public hearing, was the flight from Manila to Caticlan. And in case there will be an increase in excise taxes, Mr. Chair, there will be an increase in airfare for that particular route in the amount of around 200 pesos for a one-way fare, Mr. Chair.
Pero yung fuel cost is roughly what percentage of the ticket price?
Well, I don't have the numbers on that particular question,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
If you can just submit to us. Yeah, Yusek Chua.
Mr. Chair, just a quick answer. My secretary was chairman of PAL before, so he attests that there are many factors that affect air prices. In fact, even with the surcharge at the peak of the oil price, Cebu Pacific, PAL continued to generate market. So please, let's consider all factors. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That's a good point. No, they were operating under much higher fuel prices before. Okay, can we hear from Mr. Roberto Bayocot of the Truckers Association? Sir.
Distinguished Chairman, Senator Angara, Senator...
Huwag na po isahin, huwag na po kaming, kahit hindi nyo kami batiin, hindi kami magagalit. Diretso na po.
Yes. Good afternoon po. As per presentations of our researchers or presenters, we are talking here of hundreds of millions expenditure. Why? That is why we need a bigger collection on tax. But our group, tracking industry, is not against the implementation of tax, but the implementation of such tax for diesel fuel will result in an increase of our operations cost. As trackers, daily transactions are case-to-case basis. We will not accept any transaction if our own price is not acceptable to our clients. We usually pass on to our clients the additional cost of our operations. That is why the most affected parties of this implementation of excise tax are the end users. The prayer of our group, the trackers should be exempt from excise tax. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Bayocat. Si Attorney Vigor Mendoza of the One Utak Group, former congressman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sir, just to clarify certain points, Mr. Chair. The effect of the 2016-2017 fare increase is merely a provisional increase of 1 peso. LTFRB has yet to decide on the actual fare case that was filed at the time. What was being asked really, Mr. Chair, to adjust with the 14 peso increase in fuel price was a 2 peso adjustment. So the 8 pesos that we have right now as minimum fare, if decided upon by LTFRB, should be around 9 pesos this time, but it's still pending. Now, with the continuous rise in fuel, transport groups are now thinking of another 1 peso increase. No? But the 6 peso increase on tax, the impact would be around 1 peso, 120 to 150 on the first 4 kilometers for PUJs. But that would bring our fares, given what's spending right now in the LTFRB, from 8 pesos to around 11 pesos. That's 150 for that, to compensate for the increase in tax, another 150 to compensate for the past increases in fuel. A 3 peso increase from the 8 pesos, that would be around a 40% jump in transport costs. Maybe the Honorable Chair, the Honorable Committee would like to consider, I remember the NCR wage order, last wage order, was based on a transport fare, a minimum PUJ fare of 8 pesos and 50 centavos. And perhaps an 11 peso rise in transport fare would impact on wage, which would eventually impact on inflation. We took note of the 1 billion Pantawid Pasada, Mr. Chair. Given the number of public utility vehicles, tricycle and jeepneys, I don't think that will last 1 year. Baka kulang lang, no? Maybe we can make use of that in a better mode. We've been trying to impress upon government that 1 billion can go a long way as far as helping the sector very well. And finally, Mr. Chair, we've been supportive.
Are you supportive of the Pasada?
We've been supportive. You know, we have our foreign position paper is against Pantawid Pasada. Given the two historical data that run.
How would you rather the money be used?
Well, on long-term benefits, we discusses with them, livelihood, modernization will help, but how to trickle it downwards is what we have yet to see. We've been supportive, Mr. Chair, on the increase in excise tax from day one. But what we'd like to see really is how the subsidies would trickle down to our sector. In our last meeting, Mr. Chair, we mentioned that 52% of the drivers in Metro Manila, who eventually shouldered the fuel costs, earn 500 pesos and less. For a 30-liter consumption a day, a 6 peso increase would wipe out 180 pesos of that 500 pesos, or roughly around 40% of their take-home pay.
What do you suggest? Is there a counter proposal on your part?
Well,
what can the drivers bear?
Your Honor, given the subsidies that was listed, the 5 subsidies that was listed, given our experience on Pantawid Pasada for the last 2 administrations, Your Honor, I think the only recourse would be to increase fares.
So, given that if the LTFRB is willing to increase fares, okay na sa inyo yun? Parang ganun ba yung sinasabi niyo?
Your Honor, I think that would be the best option given the subsidies mentioned. I don't think any of the subsidies would trickle down as fast to the sector except for a fare increase.
But again, we go back to the point you made that 6 pesos you feel is too high. What do you feel is a good amount?
The sector is opting for we proposed this in the last administration, we're not proposing it again here. Given the steady increase in fuel price this past weeks, and we don't know how this will continue on, maybe we'd like to also consider an out-of-the-box solution, maybe a 2-tier pricing, 1 tier for public transport, 1 tier for the private vehicles. That way we don't have to increase fares, it will not impact on wages. And
administratively, that might be difficult, no, to distinguish, because then at the pump they have to distinguish sinong taxable, sinong hindi.
Before,
but no, I mean, just a simple question, sir. What is your proposal if you feel 6 pesos is too high? Give us a figure that you think is workable.
I'm not saying 6 pesos is too high. As I said, the 6 pesos will only impact 1 peso and 50 centavos on jeepney fares. But given the effect on the other sectors and how the subsidies will trickle down, I don't see the subsidies trickling down that fast in order to help the sector immediately.
So wala kayong figure, in other words?
If those are the subsidies, Your Honor, it would rather go a fare increase rather than a reduction.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Attorney Vigor. Can you hear Mr. Orlando Marquez from the LTOP?
Magandang hapon po. Sa amin po, yung stand po ng ang aming abogado ko, sinususugan po namin dahil yun pong aming nakikita sa ngayon na Mr. Senator, ay talagang kami po yung nahihirapan sa public transport dahil unang-una po, yung pagdami po ng sasakyan na grabe po ang traffic, lahat tayo po ay affected sa traffic. Dahil nga po doon sa pag kami po ay nag-overprice ng pamasahe, huhuliin kami, iimpong kami. Pero yung nangungontrata dahil bawal po ang contracting passenger, yun po yung nagpapahirap ngayon sa amin dahil nga dun sa traffic. Imbis na ang aming karga, Senator, ng ating araw-araw na daily use na crudo, imbis na 20 liters, 30 liters, pila-pila sana yun. Dahil sa traffic po, nagiging doble po yung aming gastusin. Kaya yung kita po ng aming mga tsuper, nauubos, pupunta lang po doon sa natutuwang mga oil company. Dahil po, tuwang-tuwa po sila yung mga oil company pagka malaki ang gastos natin lahat sa crudo. Kaya sana ho, yung pong isa po na problema natin, i-repeal na po yung deregulation law sa oil.
Okay, salamat ho. Mr. Efren De Luna from ACTO or ACTO. Wala na po. Maybe Attorney Vestil, sir, you want to comment on the pending application for fare increase?
Yes, Mr. Chair, distinguished senators, first of all, we would like to reiterate the position of the LTFRB that we are supportive of the excise tax measure, primarily because the excise taxes will also form part of what will be utilized for the PUV modernization. As regards the fare increase, we will not claim to have the exact figures or the proper figures as regards the claim that the fares would have to increase by 3 pesos. Actually, if I remember correctly, Mr. Chair, there was a figure quoted by Executive Director Trinidad Rodriguez of the National Tax Research Center. But I'm not sure if it was with respect to excise tax on fuel or with respect to automobiles. But if I recall correctly, the figure that she cited was much lower. We do not discount, in the context of the fare increase that is presently pending, that there must be an adjustment in the fare. But then this is also part of the PUV modernization. All of these, Mr. Chair, in the same way that the excise tax is a package, the PUV modernization is also a package. There are various aspects which seek to address not only the traffic situation but also the the jeepneys and how much our jeepney drivers, our PUV drivers will earn from operating their vehicles. So in essence, while we support the, we reiterate our support for the DOF on this matter.
So no intention of granting that, making it permanent in the near future?
I believe it is something, Your Honor, that we are still studying at the LTFRB.
Okay, thank you. Airline and shipping sector, Attorney Inigo Pieras of Philippine Airlines.
Hi,
Any
good
additional
afternoon.
to what you said earlier? Huh?
No additional, nothing more, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Attorney Herschel Magrasha of the Alliance of Philippine Fishing Federations.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. The Alliance of Philippine Fishing Federation has already submitted our position paper on this issue, and we expressed our opposition to the proposed measure, considering that at least 60% of our operations can be attributed to fuel. So with the proposed increase in fuel, it will substantially affect our operations.
Q. Attorney Pedro Aguilar from the Inter-Island Shipping Association.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Senators. When the proposed bill was discussed, Mr. Chairman, we made a preliminary simulation of the effect of 3 peso, 2 pesos, 1 peso excise tax, and the result is that we have various members, Mr. Chairman. We have passenger shipping member companies, and we also have cargo, purely cargo, and tankers. Now,
How many vessels does your association
yes,
represent?
yes,
Ilang
Mr.
vessels
Chairman.
po? Ilang pong vessels total?
Total, I do not have the figure right now, Mr. Chairman, but we made a simulation on each type of vessels. For liners, those that have a fixed route and carrying cargos, purely cargos, containerized cargos, the 3 peso increase in excise tax would result to a 3% increase in freight for containerized cargo. Roughly in absolute value, Mr. Chairman, it would be 1,300 something peso per 20-foot container. Now for the tankers,
could you say that again? Magkano per container? 24?
Roughly, Mr. Chairman, 1,300 something pesos.
Okay.
But the problem, Mr. Chairman, is this is not the only increase, because shipping is part of the supply chain. Now, all the containers that are being brought to our ships for transport in the Visayas and Mindanao have to be transported by trucks, and since trucks are using diesel too, so they would be incurring additional expense too. So with respect to tankers, our members have simulated that the increase would be, the effect of the 3 peso is a 6% increase on freight. Fortunately for tankers, the arrangement is more of a contract or a negotiated arrangement with the oil companies. Now for passengers, I would refer to our member Archipelago Philippine Ferries, who is engaged in the transport of passenger, whether what is the effect of the 3 peso, 2 peso, and 1 peso excise tax. Mr. Chet Pastrana.
He is next on the list. So, tapos na po kayo? Thank you, sir. Can we hear from Mr. Pastrana for the Archipelago Philippine Fisheries Corporation?
Good afternoon, Senators. Sir, right now we are servicing most of the small islands. This program was initiated during the time of President Arroyo, when they launched the Strong Nautical Republic Highway, where we were able to connect Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao using short ferry connections. The impact of the fuel price increase will range about 3 to 5%, which Mr. Aguilar mentioned. But I think what is really a concern for us, USEC, CUA, is we can mitigate the cost of fuel in our operation, which represents 20 to 30%, by addressing modernization of our maritime asset. Right now, 41% of the vessels in the Philippines are more than 35 years old. And it's only in 2010 when the industry started to modernize, and there are less than 20 vessels in the RoRo sector that have modernized. We need to modernize more than 101 vessels once the Marina Circular has been passed on retiring 35-year-old vessels, which are categorized not to be suitable for our operation. So more importantly, I think, aside from the fuel, we have to address the issue of supporting modernization in the shipping industry and the shipbuilding industry, Your Honor.
Which means?
Because in the tax proposal, they remove all the incentives on modernization. Unlike the land sector where they provided subsidy on modernization on PUV, in maritime and shipbuilding and ship repair, this was all removed, sir.
That's you received incentives under the domestic shipping law, no?
Yes, sir.
Which have expired already.
There is Republic Act 9295, 9337, and there are executive orders that promoted the modernization of maritime assets, Your Honor.
But it did not. How many were modernized during that time? When incentives?
Right now, sir, there are about 20 vessels. Present here is one of the companies that modernize. The company Starlight Ferries of Mr. Francis Cusi also built 10 vessels. We built 12 and we're still building another 28 more. So there's still a lot of vessels that needs to be modernized. So we can mitigate the fuel cost by having more efficient vessels, more modern vessels suitable for our Philippine conditions, Your Honor.
Yes.
Senator Dulon.
Are you amenable to, all right, we recognize this because I keep on hearing this, the lack of incentive to modernize our maritime industry. Would you, would a incentive with a sunset clause encourage you to go into this, to modernize the fleet? Because, you know, without a sunset clause, you just keep on postponing plans to modernize, so that maybe if we have a window, okay, so for X number of years or X number of whatever, short period of time, you have the incentive. After that, wala na. In order to really encourage your group to go into modernization.
Your Honor, that's a very good idea. In fact, it takes about 14 months to build a brand new ship. And I think a sunset provision is very applicable so that we can fast-track the modernization of the maritime industry in the Philippines. A 5-year to 6-year period would be amenable, but it's all subject to probably further consultation with the stakeholders because there are 7,107 islands. 80 million passengers uses the sea lanes inbound, outbound. 110 million tons of cargoes are being moved in the islands. So I think to have a more efficient network of vessels and integrated solution in approaching all this movement of cargoes between Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao would help mitigate all of this adjustment in fuels, Your Honor.
Mr. Chair, if I may quickly comment together yung fishing and the domestic shipping. Indeed, there was a Domestic Shipping Development Act provided 10-year exemption. However, I understand it expired and it was not fully utilized because I don't think there's also any performance-based contract. So that would be a way to incentivize. And I really welcome, Mr. Chair, his comment.
What do you mean performance-based contract?
Well,
sorry.
That it's not enough to provide sunset provision. If you get incentives, you have to show results. So that's the general idea when we present package to it. We have to show jobs, exports, and ships. But I really appreciate that beyond the fuel, there are other more important aspects that we can help the sector. In fact, when I discussed with the fishing commercial fishing sector, I found out that it's not only excises that is their problem. Their problem is they cannot fish within the 15-kilometer radius where most of the fish are. Number two, their personnel are not field of personnel.
For you, 15-kilometer radius, isn't that reserved for
municipal? That's
scale
right.
fishermen?
So their concern is, as commercial, they have to fish further, but they're not.
But there's a
fish
reason
there.
for that, diba?
Yes,
I mean, you're protecting the smaller fishermen.
Correct. But what I'm saying is there are many factors we can help them with. Second is their field personnel the fishermen are not considered field personnel. So at 3 a.m. they have to be paid overtime, and 1/4 of your fish you claim to be smuggled. So I think there are many ways we can help the sector apart from the oil excise. So I think given that, I would like to highlight, Mr. Chair, that apart from the oil excise increase, we are open to discussing with all the affected sectors on more targeted manner to addressing their core problem, rather than just exempting one without addressing the core issues po.
Yusek, can we hear on fuel marking? We have Ms. Rosario Bradbury for Authentics.
Yes, sir. Magandang hapon po. Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to respond to the advocacy on the environment and on the earth, because I think without making any influence on the requirements for fuel marking, I think one of the things we have to understand is to make sure that the marker technology use is not going to further harm the environment. I think that's very key, because markers should be composed solely of elements already present in fuels, that is only carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and comply with all the environmental policy requirements of the Philippines and follow best practices aimed at protecting human health and the environment from persistent pollutants such as halogens or metals, including other international environmental and health guidelines such as the US EPA Clean Air Act standards. I think that's very key. And it should not contain restricted substances or atypical additives or elements such as halogen, bromine, chlorine, metal, zinc, nickel, lead, metalloids, boron, and silicon. So the marker should be invisible, unique, and cannot be compromised, masked, or copied in any economical manner. It should not color or alter the fuel properties in any manner, and the marker should also allow precise quantitative measurement to determine product dilution in any adulterants. I think what's very key in the fuel marking is it has to be an end-to-end solution. It's the right technology. It should be something of the forensics type, because the key here is enforcement. And the responsibility of the joint partnership between the government and the service provider is very key, because if the enforcement is not very effective, the trust and confidence of the oil companies will be lost in that respect. And by the way, this is a joint statement from Authentics and SGS. You see that we've been over 20 years experience for 20 fuel marking programs. We partner with SGS for 18 years. I'm an ex-SGS as well for 30 years.
Could you give us the 20, Madam?
Pardon, sir?
Could you give us the 20?
I don't memorize it, but we have Serbia, Guyana,
Which are the most successful?
Serbia, sir.
Serbia.
Serbia, and I can tell you specifically, for example, of the effect of the Serbia contract. Their problem statement was a man-tax fuel is smuggled into the country and sold illegally. Tax and road fuels are being adulterated with subsidized products such as heating oil and inferior products base oil. So they use the solution that we have presented to them, and the benefits realized, just to give you a case, is over 35 million euro money in additional excise tax collected in the first 5 months of the program, and 15% increase in retail sales, 7 times drop in sales of base oils, which is a known diesel adulterant. So that's one of the very successful contracts. The others is Guyana, Ghana, Saudi Arabia. We are not supposed to say that, but the kingdom countries, and many others in the African countries, sir. And we have also commercial clients aside from government clients who are trusting the fuel marking
Any
programs.
in Southeast Asia?
Yeah. In Southeast Asia, we have an ongoing discussion with India, Indonesia, and other Asian countries, sir.
So no actual experience.
I will have to validate that, sir, if you can allow me.
Okay, thank
you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Gila.
India is already, sorry, India is already operational, sorry.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the marking appears to be an administrative remedy in order to prevent smuggling. Is that the correct understanding?
I think that's a correct understanding. Yeah.
If this is so, why is the resistance? Is there resistance to this? There is none.
I don't think anyone has really expressed.
Because I heard somebody here earlier, Executive Director Teodoro, whatever. The gentleman there at the corner, Mr. Chairman, said that if there is marking, it will affect the tourism industry. Is that how I heard it? No? Or I may be wrong?
Sir, that's another thing. I said if my comments, of our comments on the fuel marketing program will be reserved when we go to that portion on the fuel marketing discussion.
Maybe you say, what is your position?
Our position on the fuel marketing is that if it's going to be a part of the law, it's going to be one of the provisions of the law. But the background, Senator Drilon, is there is in the past there was a fuel marketing program which is a pilot program. There was already a pilot marketing program which was implemented as a pilot about between 2005 to 2009. It was pilot.
So what's the point?
There were a lot of enforcement issues. There were a lot of problems, a lot of logistical and operational concerns that were experienced in the implementation.
That's what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman. There appears to be resistance to this, and that's what I'm trying to figure out, why it is being resisted.
I think it was resisted, from what I understand. No? Please, anyone can jump in and correct me because I have a very limited knowledge of this. But we've received some feedback already. It was imposed. It was piloted in Subic, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
Tama ba?
Yes, sir.
It was piloted in Subic, and then so a lot of times there was but sabi ng mga oil executives, if it's done for the whole country, there's less chance of a leakage. But anyway, let's hear from those who've had experience. Can we hear from Director Layug of the Ports Operations Service of the Bureau of Customs?
I'm Director Layug, sir. Good afternoon. With regard to the pilot project, sir, though I was not in custom during that time.
Magdalo ba kayo? Magdalo?
Sir.
Magdalo ba kayo?
Kasama, classmate ko po si Senator Trillanes.
PMA kayo?
PMA class 95, sir.
Okay.
Anyway, to begin with, sir, I just want to say that the fuel marking program is a serious program. It's a downstream enforcement program that is that's really an enforcement tool that is very important since if we increase, especially we're talking about increasing the tax of fuel, that will have a social impact on most of our countrymen. And right now, we have around 26 billion pesos of foregone revenue in oil smuggling alone. 26 billion pesos, sir, annually.
Hindi naman nalalagay sa green lane yan.
Forgone.
Tulad nung EMT marketing.
Sana
hindi kaya
po,
doon
hindi,
dumadaan?
Sir. Sana po hindi, sir. Sana po.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, it's a really serious task na ipinapasa sa amin ngayon ng DOF, giving us the duty and responsibility of implementing the fuel marking enforcement the fuel marking program as an enforcement tool to curb out illicit trade and to stop fuel smuggling. No. As a tool, sir, to put it simply, sir, that tool can be associated or be compared to the tax stamps that we use for cigarettes, sir. So if used properly, we can go after the downstream goods or smuggled goods, unpaid fuel, by post entry audit or checking. No, to give an example is yung Mighty, sir, nahuli natin 25 billion pesos ang babayaran niya because of that tax stamp program. So kung it will be enforced seriously, sa tingin ko we will be able to at least diminish yung sir, or at least plug the hole in the fuel
Does it have a cost on the oil companies to go into this
on that part, sir, the process will be, or the method of putting on cost is still in the policy
because I'm trying to
study.
understand the resistance. If the resistance is because
Yes,
of the
sir.
additional cost,
yung previous program, sir, may additional na around 7 centavos per liter, I think, for the marker.
so that's the underlying reason for what appears to be resistance.
Yes, sir.
There is that correct, Yusek Chua?
Mr. Minority Leader, apart from that, which is actually very small, if it's 7 centavos per liter, a full tank of 50 liters would just be 3 peso and 50 cents. I think, of course, the bigger concern maybe are some bad elements who are benefiting from smuggling. That would be, I think, a source of resistance. But I think everyone here believe that we should enforce it better. So I think we should move forward.
That's why I could not understand why this is being debated upon when it should be done, Mr. Chairman, Director Lai.
Senator Dela.
Sorry.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Direk.
Sir, if I may, 1 year kami rito, sir, eh. So, ang unang ibinigay na nung nag-industry study kami, yun nga sir nakita namin yung fuel. Ang hirap talaga siyang ang hirap mo siyang mahuli. Yung sinasabi nila na sa high seas, yung ship-side loading, ang hirap niyan. Yung Navy nga sir, hindi natin ma-cover yung 36,000 kilometers of coastline. So, ang pinaka effective and efficient way is to check it dun sa sir, downstream, pagka nandun na sa baba, mas madali. And as per experience din sir, dun sa tinatanong ni Senator Angara sir, regarding dun sa if it should be legislated sir.
Ilalagay pa ba? Why don't we just give the authority for the DOF to...
Yun nga sir.
I think, Senator Dillon is here.
Yes,
maybe yung legal opinion, pwede tayong humingi sa kanya dahil matagal na yung experience niya. Like when SGS was removed during the ERAP administration, did that require legislation? I think it was just an executive decision, di ba? On the part of the...
I'll walk you through dun sa process, sir. No? Yung nangyari kasi dun sa pilot project, so minarkahan yung lahat ng nasa free zones sa Subic, sir, lahat ng pumapasok kasi tax-free siya. So pag lumabas siya ng free zone, mahahabol mo, machi-check mo.
Yes, yes.
Smuggled ka, di ba? Pero because of non-enforcement or non-penalizing, kasi department order lang, sir. So it has to go through with the usual process of issuing letter of authority, the WSD or warrant of seizure and detention, and then going through the forfeiture procedures. Na at the end of the day, it took so long na yung mismong fuel, sir, or yung diesel na-contaminate dahil wala namang pag hinuli mo yun, sir, hindi mo naman hahanapan mo ng lilipatan yung tangke nun. Kukunin mo, so wala tayong, sir, storage tanks for that or warehouse. So nagkaroon, sir, ng mga problema in that regard kasi it is being treated as just another ordinary unlawful importation of goods. So ngayon, if we will implement this, and we're looking at thousands of metric tons kapag ka nakahuli. So what happens?
Just to summarize, Director, pasensya na sa interruption, but you're saying the existing penalties under the Tariff and Customs Code and the
CMTA
Revenue Code are not sufficient to...
The process, sir, is
the process.
Yes, sir. It has to. It will take special
but what is
policies
here,
and procedures.
I read through them. What is in this legislation or draft legislation? Anong nandun that would speed up the process, Yusek?
Well, Mr. Chair, although I agree that this can be done administratively, it will provide more teeth to this important enforcement activity if the principles were to be legislated and also the penalties highlighted so that people will understand that we are serious. However, I propose also that some of the very detailed wording be delegated to the IRR instead of having a
because
very
you're
detailed
essentially carving something into stone, and later on there's no
Yes.
backtracking from that.
No,
if
not at all.
If your is unsuccessful, if the
I think
experience is unsuccessful.
I think the experience that may become unsuccessful will have to be improved, similar to the requirement in the law that we have to put cigarette stamp and alcohol stamp tax, sir.
We can phrase it, Mr. Chairman, in the general language and probably cite marking as
a violation,
including marking
Okay.
as a
Okay, I think that's satisfactory. Yeah, Director, tapusin niyo lang po yung sa inyo.
Yes, sir. Just to cite an example, sir, yung last December, merong tanker MT Magnolia with 43,000 metric tons sa Batangas. Sa Limay, Bataan, sir. So, nag-discharge siya na huli natin and went through the process nung It went through the process ng forfeiture proceedings up to the Court of Tax Appeal right now. But the fuel itself nandun sa loob nung tanker, hindi namin malaman, sir, paano ililipat or paano magiging disposition niya. So I think it needs a special attention, sir, for the handling the smuggled fuel goods.
Even that can be through, doesn't have to be in the legislation, di ba? It can be, I mean, the DOF can formulate or the BIR or herself, regulations, customs administrative orders, di ba? I mean, anything we can legislate, you can also do at your level, unless it's imposing criminal penalties, then that's something only Congress can legislate.
In fact, Mr. Chair, that the latter is, I think, the value added of having it explicitly put in legislation to make it very explicit that this is a serious enforcement activity po.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I be allowed to speak on fuel marking, sir?
Who is this?
I was involved in the fuel marking program of the...
Could you identify yourself, sir?
Viking Logarta of ICSC. I was involved in the fuel marking program of the Ministry of Energy in the mid-80s, and the primary objective of that marking was to discourage adulteration of regular and premium gasoline with kerosene and diesel. So that's why I want to ask you, Sir Chua, if the objective of the marking program that you're envisioning is only solely to prevent smuggling or also to prevent adulteration. Because if the greater the tax differential,
Yes.
the greater the incentive to adulterate
Yes.
or to commit adultery.
Yes. Yes, sir. Actually, that's also part of it, yung adulteration ng kerosene to diesel, sir. Yung pag-mix nila. And at the same time, also in quality assurance, if we are advocating, carbon, the lower carbon emission, so mostly yung smuggled fuels, sir, yan yung mga dirty fuels, eh.
Thank you, Mr. Lugarta. Thank you. Okay na, Director Laik, tapos na kayo?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, salamat. Can we hear from, yeah, we'll hear from the other, and maybe you can have a second round after, but really to give, well, yung katabi nyo na po ang sunod, eh, si Mr. Batong Bakal of Dow Chemical Pacific.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon. To add to what was discussed earlier, our company, through acquisition, have started fuel marking in 1950s. Fuel marking for in the UK. So the industry already has over 60 years of experience. But just to show the importance of flexibility in the law, there are already 4 generations of markers today. When it started with simple colors, no? And then it migrated to colorless that transforms. No? Today we're talking about molecular markers and more sophisticated things. And the question is why? Because the smugglers, particularly in Europe, and the case in point is in UK, they have adopted to laundering. No? So it is important, the term is laundering, where they're able to put the fuel through a process where they're able to take out whatever marker is there. So the state of the art ngayon enables us to be virtually unlaunderable. No? Now, no scientist would say that nothing can be changed in the future, which is why it would be important to have that flexibility to say that fuel marking, the fuel marking program should be open to newer technologies. Maybe we'll be talking about generation 5, 6, or 7. A recent example, in 2015, we implemented a fuel marking program with Ireland. And by the end of 2015, they had a tedious assessment, and they claimed to have recovered or generated 300 million euro in 1 year. Other successful cases that we have experienced is in the UK, and we are looking forward to the implementation of Korea of similar technologies that we've used in UK and Ireland. If I may backtrack, Dow Chemical is a science company. We operate in 180 countries, and we're a 120-year-old company. Sustainability, environmental solutions are very important. But I guess I think the most, the fuel market technology can only bring us so far. It is essential to collaborate with the DOF, the BOC, the BAR, DOE, police, EMB, and the fuel producers to make sure that we're able to preserve the gains of the excise tax program. Maraming salamat po.
Are you competitors with Ms. Bradbury, Authentics?
Yes, we will.
We're friendly competitors.
You're a friendly competitor?
Yes.
What do you think of Authentics products? What do you think of
Well,
Authentic products?
I think both companies are among the leading suppliers worldwide. Not to say that
How about
there
you,
are no
Ms.
others.
Bradbury? What do you think of Dow Chemical?
Dow, we recognize, is a very big, internationally known company, but their differentiation is we focus mainly on fuel marking. So therefore, we have a lot of scientists that really make sure that we are ahead of the competition in terms of security in that matter.
But why is it that you are in the smaller countries like Serbia, Guyana, whereas Dow is in UK, Ireland, and Korea, more developed countries? I'm just curious. I'm curious.
Honestly, I cannot answer that at this point. We look at it in the countries that really needs the help of economic recovery and addressing.
No, but it's not a matter of strategy on your part to focus on developing countries, no?
Not necessarily,
Not
sir. It
necessarily,
is
okay.
those countries that require. But can I plug something that Authentics is also a brand integrity company that we do the authentication of currencies in many major countries. So that's
Okay.
another differentiation. Like the US dollar is one of them.
Okay. Thank you. The BSP is here. You can plug your services to them
Yeah.
later. Yeah.
I tried.
Yeah. Can we hear from Mr. Thomas Drillon from Intertech? Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Just perhaps to add to the issues that have already been said here, just to clarify, the fuel marking program has two main components: the marker and the testing or the monitoring, which is more crucial nationwide. So the marker is supplied by our esteemed guests here, and our role is basically to provide the service. Number one, to mix the marker with the fuel, and I think more importantly is to perform the nationwide monitoring and testing
Your
of
company is
the
in
retail
the
stations.
in the business of number 2.
Yes, sir.
Not in number 1.
Not in number one. So the crucial aspect of the nationwide monitoring and testing of the retail stations is very crucial to the success of the program. And that is where we come in. In regard to the procedure, we have already submitted to you, sir, a position paper on how we propose the procedure to be undertaken to ensure more transparency, more efficiency, and perhaps more sustainability. I'd like to highlight the fact that Senator Drillon had pointed out that the program is actually an anti-smuggling program, and also it helps the adulteration issue. That's very true. Now, the smuggling issue has been quantified at about 26 billion to about a range of 40 billion pesos per year. And this is according to our major, some of our major petroleum players. The cost, I think, is one of the issues that may form one of the issues why there is some resistance to the program. Now, based on the discussions with the various stakeholders to be involved, the cost per liter is probably about 10 centavos. This is the marker plus the service. So there may be resistance in terms of cost. Now, if you look
Can you
at the
break that down? What's the marker cost?
well, the marker cost is apparently now at about 7 centavos, and I believe the service is about somewhere in the 3 centavos per liter.
It's quite an expensive service, huh?
Well, it's a
half the
nationwide
cost.
service, sir. Nationwide. We will be in areas like Marawi and you name it, no? But if you look at it on a financial aspect, the cost, the coverage of this program, according to the...
Should be the one to give the transfer also, since you'll be all over the country. Yung mga unconditional cash transfers.
Well,
Para makatipid yung gobyerno,
I'll
di ba?
talk to you, Yusek Leiko, about that later, sir. But going back very quickly, sir, to the cost, 10 centavos per liter, the actual, the coverage that they believe is affected is about 18 to 27 billion liters a year. Now, if you take 10 centavos per liter, The actual cost of the program is about 2.7 billion at its highest. If you look at the benefit, if the figures of the BOC is correct, that the smuggling is 26 billion, and if the figures of the petroleum industry is correct at 40 billion, let's take the low of 26 billion. The country is still ahead by 24 billion pesos if you implement the program. So the question will remain, who foots the bill? Under the proposed program, government proposes it's no cost to government, hence it will be passed on to the petroleum players, and naturally that will be passed on to the public. So it will perhaps be up to government to decide whether government is willing to foot that bill and reimburse the petroleum companies, or that will be passed on to the consumer in by way of increasing their prices. But the long and short of it, sir, is we believe that the program will substantially deter smuggling and adulteration, because testing is going to be done right at the retail station itself. Results can be found within 3 to 5 minutes. If it tests positive at the retail station, a more comprehensive confirmatory test is done in the lab to find out what were the adulterants, what else was added, and how much was added. So this would, in our opinion, substantially diminish smuggling and deter adulteration.
How did you come up with your numbers? You said even at the low end of 26 billion, you will be ahead by 24 billion because you subtracted the cost of 2.7 billion.
Yes, sir. I took the 26 billion figure from the figures of Director Lai. Yes, sir. So as a whole, sir, the program is going to be advantageous to government and the Filipino people.
Okay.
Just for the record, Mr. President.
Are you related, Senator Drilon?
First, we are related. Number two, I did not know that Tom here is with Intertech, and I do not know what Intertech is all about. When I espouse for, I didn't know. I didn't know the.
Thank you,
just
Senator
for the
Drilon, for the
record.
transparency. Can we hear from Mr. Ramon Lacdan, the United Color Manufacturers?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and panels of the Senate. Our position here is we support the fuel marking program. As you may probably have heard, we have been actually following up this program since the year 2014. And we are assuming that we are progressing in this process. But just for the record, United Color, which is the company that I represent, actually has been involved in fuel marking from the year 2006 to the year 2013. And this is the initiative of the Department of Energy for Adulteration Detection program, whereby all the fuel players were mandated to use fuel marker in order to discourage the adulteration of low-grade fuel into the high-grade fuel. And that means diesel and kerosene going into the high-valued gasoline. So we are in favor of fuel marking because we see the rationale why the government is implementing this.
In the dye or the testing business, the marker or the testing business? Which business are you in?
We are in the business of supplying technology for marking.
So the markers.
Of fuel, yes.
And where have you experienced, sir? What countries?
We have successful programs ran in the U.S., in Europe, in the Philippines and Korea, very recently, and even right now we have about 3 marking programs ongoing in South Korea.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
So we believe that the fuel marking program will benefit the Philippine government because, you know, at the tune of 26 billion or $40 billion pesos, that's very significant in order to be able to realize the good and, shall we say, ambitious programs of the present government in respect to infrastructure, new airports, new roads, which will solve finally most of the crucial problems that we have in the Philippines. We believe that our technology has worked in many places, and we feel that our program is superior because our program has the quality of being able to detect whether it's legitimate or illegitimate fuel that comes into the country in a relatively short time, like 2 minutes. And our cost, which includes the marker and also the inspection, will be in the region of 2.5 centavos per liter, which is not really too much if you have to consider the regular increases in the amount of increases in fuel. Yeah.
Done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank
Thank you very much.
Can we hear from Ms. Krista Filius from SGS? Please turn off your mic, sir. Mr.
Good
Can you
afternoon.
please turn off your mic? Go ahead, Ms. Filius.
First of all, thank you for giving us the opportunity to join your meeting. We concur to the statement, or at least join the statement that Ms. Rosario given before. If you would like us to give some more background information.
Could you please speak
on the
louder,
pilot?
please?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us. During the meeting, we would like to join with the statement that Ms. Rosario from Authentics gave before. If you would like us to explain more about the previous pilot in Subic, we would be happy to do so. We brought our consultant, Mr. Bailey, who ran the program at the time.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Yep, I ran the previous pilot project from December 2008 to 2013. We marked tax-exempt diesel and tax-exempt kerosene out of Batangas. So the diesel out of Subic and Clark, the kerosene out of Batangas. We were actually marking very small quantities. At best, we marked 18 million liters in a month, out of which probably 14, 15 million was legitimately being sold, either to the mine site at Semirara or to the Freeport zones where it could be sold tax exempt. So we were actually looking for probably 3 million maximum per month. We actually caught 26 filling stations during that period, and all were resolved in favor of government, i.e. the tax was taken back. The issue came in that there was no enforcement. You know, what is the risk? I'm going to smuggle in 20,000 liters to a filling station in Bataan, and the worst that's going to happen is I'm going to have to pay the tax that I would have had to pay anyway. So there's not really a lot of risk, and there's a very good chance that I'll get away with it. When we caught the filling stations, unfortunately, as Director Lyog has said, there were times when it took 48 hours for a mission order to come through for the Bureau of Customs to accompany us to the filling station and do an official sampling. What happened was we used to go around covertly, sample. When we got a positive, we then contacted Bureau of Customs. During that period, the filling station's still selling fuel, and very often they restocked, so there was dilution with good product, such that at the end of the day, when the official sampling took place with Bureau of Customs, given the technology that we used at the time, we were just using a positive or negative test kit. At the end of the day, the results being now diluted were considered not to be sufficiently clear to proceed any further. But there was no prosecution in any case. Nobody was taken to court, nobody was fined, nobody was, there was no attempt to trace the chain. I mean,
despite your findings.
Yeah, the filling stations probably bought the product in good faith. It was a middleman, and probably the same middleman for all 26 filling stations, for all I know. but no attempt was made to go after them.
Was there any common among the 26 filling stations? Was there a predominant
well, most of
maker
them,
or brand? Yeah.
no, most of them were in the Bataan area.
So that's kerosene. That's not
No,
diesel and
no,
gasoline.
Batangas was kerosene.
Ah, okay.
The problem with kerosene, it should not have been marked at all under those circumstances because there were two companies in Batangas, Shell and Chevron. One imported, so did not need to mark. The imported one needed to mark. The refined one did not need to mark because the customs memorandum order stipulated that it was imported kerosene needed to be marked. So out in the field, we could legitimately find both marked and unmarked.
Could you put your findings in writing and submit it to
We already
the committee?
have.
Okay, thank you.
We can supply that.
So are you supportive of this new effort by the... Could you turn off your mic, Ms. Bradbury? Yeah.
Very much so. I mean, we've met with various
You're supportive of
stakeholders
this,
here.
SGS provides the service.
Who
was doing the markers at that time?
We use Authentics markers.
Okay.
And SGS provides the logistics.
Okay. And how much did the government pay for your services for the 5 years?
The government did not. It was paid by
how much did the private guys pay?
If I remember rightly, it was 7 centavos a liter.
So how big was the contract? Yeah.
We marked, if I remember rightly, I don't have the figure here, around 800 million liters in the 5-year period.
800 million
Yeah.
liters. Okay. Thank you.
In the 5-year period.
Thanks. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Are you done with the... Thank you. Thanks a
Unless
lot.
I can tell you more. Okay.
You want to... Yeah, go ahead. You have more to say?
Just to enforce the need for enforcement. When the pilot project started, the major oil companies were behind it. In fact, if I remember rightly, they were the ones who proposed it to Bureau of Customs. But with no enforcement, they rapidly withdrew their support.
Is there analysis of that, Yusek Carl, of that episode? Why the enforcement failed, or was it a willful? Was it a...
Well, Mr. Chair, for one, it was a pilot, and it was meant to be a learning experience. So I think there is a report that was presented to me by the Bureau of Customs at that time, which, if you are interested, we can submit.
Yeah, I think for the record, we'd probably be interested in that, no? So that's for fuel marking. Anyone else who care to comment for fuel marking? Mr. Lagarta, it's your third time at the mic. Others have not had their first chance yet. Huh? Just.
It's important, Mr. Chair. I just want to alert Yusek Chua that the big problem with marking is there are always type 1 and type 2 errors, which means false positives and false negatives. And if the chemical reagent results are not sufficient evidence, then the marking program becomes useless.
Okay, Chair. Thank you. So identify yourself and your organization, sir.
Mike Hinton, I'm the sales director, international sales director for United Color. Let me add 2 points. First of all, I agree with some of the other comments made. The way the laws are written does become very important. The best marker programs are those in which the governments do make absolutely specify how much, when the marker should be used. We've talked about Korea. We have business in Korea. The Korean law states our marker must be used in the kerosene in Korea. It must be used at a certain dosage rate. The procedure for the testing that is done by the service groups are specified actually by the government to run certain tests. How strongly the government approaches these marker programs really help drive success. And the other comment I'd like to make just very briefly has been said a couple times. We have to look at marker programs as means of saving money. Yes, there's a cost. There's a significant cost. You total up the 27 billion liters you get a very big number for marker cost, but you will stop the smuggling. You will stop most of the smuggling extremely quickly. And those benefits roll in very, very quickly. Nothing does well for a program than success, and you will get success doing that. Let me also just add, some costs were mentioned. My own opinion, those costs are very much the high end of what a marker program should cost you. Our estimates are down around 2.5 to 3 centavos per liter for the entire program that we would propose gets put in place here in the Philippines. And that's, again, cost that, put that against the...
I'm sure they're listening to you, and they're already considering that from the Bids and Awards Committee. Maybe you could give us in writing, sir, what you feel are the best practices in terms of...
Well, we have submitted a position paper. It goes in some of the success stories we have had.
No, but you mentioned specifically that the best examples specified the types of testing, etc.
Correct.
So
And our position
Okay.
paper addresses some of that.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, we currently mark 90 billion gallons of gasoline in the United States for one of the major marketers of gasoline in the United States. They do very, very careful analytical work on the testing side. We provide to the government of Canada, we provide to the government of Mexico, we provide to the government of Korea. So we're used to these marker programs.
Thank you. Thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, very quick. Very quick. So,
your time is up. Yeah, go ahead.
So the Philippine Institute of Petroleum was at the forefront when the pilot marking program was implemented. So we request the honorable committee, as well as the agencies of the Department of Finance, BOC, BOR, that the Philippine Institute of Petroleum be given a chance to be consulted in the preparation of the implementing rules and regulations, because we witnessed the enforcement laws, the problems encountered.
Make sure we put that in the law.
Yes,
make sure you put that. You'll be
in the IR, sir. In the
Yes.
IR. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we now go to... Thank you, Senator Julan, for coming. Ms. Yuen Abana for Partido Manggagawa.
Ay, maraming salamat po sa pagkakataon dahil ang tagal na nila nagsasalita. Ganito po, para mabilis.
Sila yun. Sila.
Opo. Ganito po, sa pinilisinta kanina na dito sa pader, ang tawag dyan yung projector ng Department of Finance, hindi namin ang husay ng kanilang mga data, pero kitang-kita na hindi pinag-aralan yung kalagayan ng mga manggagawa ng kanyang capacity to pay, capacity to buy. Halimbawa na lang, meron ba silang data na ilan ang napuputulan ng kuryente sa kada singil sa isang buwan, ilan ang napuputulan ng tubig, ilan ang napapalaya sa bahay dahil sa napakababa na nga ng mga sahod nila, mga contractuals pa. Nandito lalo na ang daya. Ito yung hindi napapaliwanag, mas majority ang bilang ng mga mahirap kaya pinalalabag ang itong tax base, lalo na yung sa VAT. Mas ito kaya sinasabi namin regressive dahil ito paurong paatras, bakit mo kukunin sa mga mahihirap ang tax? Pag-aralan niyo rin po. Dahil alam namin, okay sana yung build eh. Pero nasaan ang injustice? Alam natin puro loans yan. Pero hindi pa natin na-audit yung mismo mga utang ng ating gobyerno panlabas at panloob. Alin dito ang mga illegitimate, ang mga erroneous, basta lang tayo loans at may panigurado na tayo kaya minamadaling ipasa ito ay panigurado na manggagaling ang pambayad na yan sa mga taxes mula sa mahihirap. Naranasan nyo na ba? Nanininyobos kayo sa araw-araw? Ang cost of living noong pang 2012 ay 1,200 sa family of 6. Yung NIRC ka, ang magdaro kalahati ng magagawa ay mga nanay, kababaihan. Naranasan niyo bang hindi makatulog? Dahil bukas kakatok yung naniningin ng ilaw. Eh ngayon tataas na ng piso ngayon. Kada kilowatt nasa news na. Hindi nyo nalalaman yun. Pero kami, mga manggagawa tapat sa pagbabayad, sa taxes, dahil kinakaltas agad yan upon sweldo. Pero hindi namin naramdaman, dapat napupunta yan sa mga social services, kaya dapat yung nakukuha nyo sa train na pinapangarap, dapat alam nyo kung ilang eskwelahan ang maitatayo, ilang ospital ang maitatayo, ilan ang makikinabang kung makakalikha tayo ng mga real economy, real jobs, real wages, pero lahat yan kukunin sa mga kontraktual. Maganda sana mga projection, pero may mali. Yun ang tinututunan namin, andun ang injustice. Pinalapad niyo ang tax base kasi mas marami ang mga mahihirap at sila ang tiyak. Kita niyo mga motorista, bakit dumami ang gumagamit ng motor, hindi yung mga tandem ha? Mga magkakawa niya ng mga pumapasok sa trabaho. Bumibili yan ng langis, bumibili ng mga kagamitan sa motor. Dahil nagsasuffer sa traffic, hindi reliable itong mga mass transportation natin. Marami pang iba. Hindi natin inaral to sa lens ng gender, na nakararaming kababaihan, biktima na nitong climate crisis na to at marami pong crisis financial. At itong ngayon, ang latay sa kabayo ay, ang hampas sa kabayo ay latay sa kalabaw. Sana po, kung makatwirang sana ito, kasama nyo kami. Kaso po nakikita namin dito ang injustice. Maraming salamat po sa pagkakataon binigay ng Senado sa amin.
Salamat, Ms. Abana.
Abana po.
Abana, yes. Can we hear from Mr. Rodolfo Javillano of United Filipino Consumers?
Dito lang.
Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Chairman. Una po sa lahat, ibig po naming ipaabot sa inyo dun sa talumpati ng ating Pangulo. Ang inyong pangalan ay nabanggit. 100% po ang aming suporta sa inyo, Senator Angara, na sana ay panindigan nyo na ipagtanggol ang mga ordinaryong mamayang Pilipino. Kagaya po ng binanggit ni Nanay Yuen kanina, na mga ordinaryong Pilipino ang tatamaan ng dagdag na excise tax na ito sa ating nakararaming mga mahirap na Pilipino. At hindi po nararamdaman ng mga ordinaryong Pilipino kung saan talaga napupunta yung mga buwis na ito sapagkat hindi po talaga tumatagos sa ilalim. Bagkos ito po ay lalong magpapalubog, itong excise tax na ito sa petrolyo. At napakaganda pong naririnig natin ngayon na pinag-uusapan dun sa usapin po ng smuggling, partikular dun sa petrolyo. Nakakagulat po yung mga numero. Merong 26 billion, merong 40 billion. Pero kung ito po ay mabibigyan talaga ng solusyon, sa aming palagay, yung 40 billion, baka maliit pa po yan. Baka malayo pa yan sa tunay na katotohanan na nawawala na pondo na dapat pumapasok sa kaban ng bayan, pantulong sa ating lahat. Kung ang ating mga nasa gobyerno ay magtatrabaho lamang po ng totoo at ganun din po yung mga negosyante na magbabayad ng tamang tax. Palagay ko po itong usapin ng train na ito ng DOF ay mas marami pong prioridad na maaari nating matakpan yung mga leakages na ito, yung mga kakulangan ng ating gobyerno. Ang kailangan po natin ay investment, ang kailangan po ng mga manggagawa, ng mga Pilipino ay trabaho. Hindi po kailangan ng mga Pilipino na dagdag na train na sasagasa sa mga bawat bahay at mga bawat Pilipino. Maraming salamat po sa United Filipino Consumers and Commuters. Muli, Senator Angara, huwag kang bibitaw. Malapit na po ang eleksyon, tama ang Pangulo, pero ang boto ay wala po sa Presidente. Ang boto po ay nasa consumers at nasa commuters at sa buong publiko. Maraming salamat po.
Di na po ako tatakbo. Can we hear from Mr. Ramon San Pascual, the Executive Director of Healthcare Without Harm, formerly with PLCPD.
Hi, maraming salamat, Ginoong Chair Angara. Let me bring back the whole debate again to the issue of health and environmental impact of fossil fuel. Presently, the biggest source of energy in the Philippines is still non-renewable, and that harmful fossil fuels, which include dirty energy, such as petroleum, coal, natural gas, and oil, that are used as a major energy source, both in the electricity and in transportation. Indeed, it's also the leading source of the world global warming. As in the Healthcare Without Harm Asia, call on the Senate, on the Department of Finance, and our policymakers to use this debate on comprehensive tax reform package to address the following adverse health and environmental impact of fossil fuel. One, the increase in greenhouse gas emissions. Burning of fossil fuels have a major contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions that can single-handedly worsen global climate change. That would also impact on very vulnerable countries, particularly the Philippines. Energy production itself can directly and indirectly affect public health from extraction, transport, processing, construction, to generation, distribution, and waste disposal of any source of energy, but particularly fossil fuel energy. Second impact is in premature death. Outdoor air pollution, which primarily originates from power plants, factories, and vehicles, is one of the leading causes of death in the Philippines and also worldwide. Third impact is in the devastation of our ocean, which is again pertinent to a country like archipelagic country like the Philippines. 93% of greenhouse gases emitted by burning of fossil fuel settle back in the ocean. This leads to warming of the oceans, which has harmful effect on marine life and can also lead to oceanic acidification, resulting to coral bleaching and eventual changes in the migration and feeding cycles of marine species. Consequently, this will cause decline in the fish catch as we are experiencing already, and contamination of our food source. And therefore, based on this adverse health and environmental impact of fossil fuel, these are our recommendations that we strongly encourage to be considered in the discussion and in the inclusion in the train. First, to make use of the excise tax to stimulate the quick transition to renewable energy, that a certain portion of the fund to be generated from the excise tax on fuel and later on other discussion on energy will pave way to a cleaner, safer, and more sustainable transportation in this country. Two, to make use of the excise tax as a source of health and environmental guarantee fund that can be used to monitor and enforce the air quality standards in affected sectors and provide health care to those that are also adversely impacted, particularly the highly vulnerable and regularly exposed groups like those in the public transport system, kabilang na po yung ating mga pasahero at mga tsuper. We believe that these recommendations from healthcare and environmental representation, such as Healthcare Without Harm, will add value, will make the bill progressive into a package that is generally pro-health, pro-environment, and pro-poor. Ang dulo na lang po, Chair Angara, ang concern po namin dahil nilalagay ang health and environmental impact sa package 5 ng buong comprehensive tax reform program as mentioned a while ago by our Department of Finance, and yet ang pinag-uusapan na ngayon ay imposition ng mga bagong buwis sa energy, kabilang na po ang fuel, ay para pong naisasantabi muli ang kalusugan ng mamayan at gayon din ng ating kapaligiran sa buong discussion na ito. Ang amin po sanang pakiusap, sabay pong pag-usapan ang impact ng fossil fuel sa kalusugan at kung gano'n i-consider anumang earning na posibleng ma-generate ng bagong buwis na ito para nang sa gano'n maibalik sa mamamayan at maging totoong pro-poor ang batas na ito. Maraming pong salamat.
Thank you, Sir San Pascual. Can we hear from the BSP, Mr. Dennis Bautista?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the BSP, we would like to reiterate our support to the comprehensive implementation of the the tax reform program. We think that it is an essential and timely structural reform that would not only significantly expand the productive capacity of the economy, but also will strengthen macroeconomic policy over the medium to long term. Nonetheless, the BSP recognizes that there is a strong likelihood that inflation would be initially elevated, with estimated impact at less than 1 percentage point in 2018 and declines thereafter. Based on our latest inflation forecast, the full-year average could remain within target over the 2-year policy horizon. The price pressure could come from higher consumption taxes and increased demand from higher infrastructure spending and higher disposable income. Disciplined fiscal policy anchored on higher taxes, growth-enabling investment, and prudent debt management would reduce fluctuations in real economic activity and facilitate better inflation management and promote greater financial stability. When pursuing indexation, whether for income tax or consumption tax purposes, using the low to midpoint of the inflation target range would help anchor inflation expectations to the target. This provides predictability in the budget planning of individuals and mitigates any unexpected inflation shock. This is also consistent with the long-term goal of maintaining low and stable inflation. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Anong pinagbasehan ho nung sinabi niyong less than 1%? Was that the 6 pesos or the 3 pesos ho?
We are using the 3-2-1.
The 3-1, okay. Thank you. We ask for the comments from the DTI, Director Lourdes Yaptincha.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Chair. Actually, while these discussions are ongoing, we also have regular consultations with the Department of Finance. Definitely, the proposals will really have impact on our 2 major stakeholders, which are business and consumers. So in the course of the consultations, we discuss with the group, with the team of USEC Carl, the implications on the DTI programs, and probably try to come up with certain adjustments, or maybe try to talk about mitigating measures. But of course, this is a priority measure of the administration, and the economic team is actually closely discussing this proposal.
Thank you, Director. How about the DBM, Director Toledo? Anything to add, sir?
Yes, yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Yes, as in always in the start of this bill, and crafting the bill, we fully support the Department of Finance in crafting this comprehensive tax reform package. As a matter of fact, this is what's already considered in the proposed budget for 2018 as one of the measures that included as part of the resources of the government. So basically, but of course, aside from that, we just want to confirm that one of the mitigating measures that was mentioned, we already included in the budget for 2018. So that is basically the targeted transfers and the PUB modernization program, as mentioned earlier. But I guess from our side, I guess on the earmarking of this revenue, I guess, can I just discuss on that, Mr. Chair? Yes, as a policy, the fund allocation must be based on priority agenda of the government and the capacity of the agency to implement programs and projects attached to such priority agenda, rather than primarily on the supply of the funds. So as general policy for budgeting and allocation of funds, the DBM is against the notion of earmarking, especially to specific uses, because we cannot maximize the use of available funds. But however, given the developments and discussion with the economic managers, I think that we are considering already on available to the earmarking. But with some, of course, we have to consider also on the sunset provision, not on a probably 3 to 5 year sunset provision. And anyway, the current budget that we have proposed for 2018 is still consistent with what is to be earmarked, for example, for infrastructure, education, health, and even social services. As a matter of fact, for the infrastructure for 2018, we've already around 1 trillion already for the infrastructure project, and around 37 or 38% is being allocated to social services sector. That is in support for our what is supposed to be earmarked for that particular programs and projects. But as far as earmarking to specific programs and projects, as mentioned, we've already prepared the budget. So I guess what we can do right now is to attribute or identify programs and projects that could be attributed to the measures. And moving forward, if that is the result of the law that should be implemented, then probably we can identify what could be identified as programs and projects to be implemented moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Could you just kindly furnish us a list of the projects comprised within the 134 billion that was mentioned earlier?
Yes, well, Mr. Chair.
Salamat. Can we hear from the DOE, Director Abad? Anything to add, sir?
So, to be specific on the fuel marker, we absolutely support the move of the initiative of the Department of Finance, but as mentioned earlier, the greater concern really is on the discussion and details on the technology and methodology. I think it would be good to add that the injection, I just call it an injection, sir. The injection, the unregistered injection, might not be only in terms of importation, but maybe on the downstream side also, going up to the retailer part, there might be also an injection there. And of course, the greater concern for the Department of Energy also is on the enforcement side, as mentioned also earlier. Without that strong enforcement, then the high impact value of this move would actually subside in the long run. So we support, but we need to go further with the details of the technology, security, and the methodology of the program.
Thank you, Director. Hindi ko alam bakit niyo binabanggit yung enforcement. Kayo nag-i-enforce ng batas eh. Kami batas lang ang ginagawa namin.
Yes, sir.
Kayo rin na mag-i-enforce eh.
Yes, sir. So
nasa inyo yan.
So yes, sir. So we need to talk with the methodology.
Yes, of course. Okay, thank you. Can we hear from NPC, Mr. Sarmiento? Meron pang
I have nothing more to add, Mr. Chair, unless my colleague has something to say.
Yeah.
Ms. Versosa.
Ms. Versosa. Okay.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. I am Maria Annabel Versosa from Electricity Tariff Division.
Ano niyo po si Kylie Versosa? Yung binibining Pilipinas. Just kidding.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, we are in support to the law since it's a conception, because it was discussed already with us by USEC, and we already raised to him the impact to the island grid. And in line with that, he also considered on how to mitigate the impact in his programs. So that's all we can say, Your Honors.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Si Director Rodriguez, nandito pa ba? NTRC? Ba't kayo lumipat, ma'am? Hindi mo ba komportable yung upuan na yan? Yeah. Anything to add, ma'am?
No, actually, USEC has extensively discussed all the data that
we just ask assistance from the NTRC, because I know you do histories of the taxes on particular products, so kerosene, LPG. Can we, I know there's different treatment over the years, no? Can we just ask assistance for that? Si Depcom Valeroso. Sir, objection?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, the Bureau of Internal Revenue fully supports the tax reform program initiated by our mother department, the Department of Finance, and the President. In fact, we are working very hard to support the Department of Finance in terms of data. That's your honor.
Thank you. Meron pa bang hindi natawag around the table? Yeah, Mr. Lakban, anything to add, sir?
Yes, I just wanted to appeal to the Department of Finance in our sector as a supplier for the technology of marking. We'll kindly ask if when is possible to receive a copy of the terms of reference in order for us to understand how the government plans to go ahead. We understand that the program will start by January 1st, 2018, and we need about minimum of 3 months in preparation if in case we get elected to be one of the operators of this program.
Hey, I'm not the person to consult for that. You can talk to Yusek Chua and Director Layug after the committee hearing.
Yes, no? We'll discuss it with you. Actually, we will be publishing invitation for providers to at least to present their technology and their capabilities. But with regard to the bid acquisition process, it's still on the table of Secretary of Finance on what mode of acquisition will be appropriate for the said program. Yes, sir. But definitely we'll be inviting each and every one of you, especially right now. We already talked with 4 of the providers, and I think our staff already communicated with your office, so that we are in the process of crafting the policy, the Customs Memorandum Order, in order to come up with a policy that will be appropriate once we launch the program next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Yusek Chua, any last words? No? Any more? Yeah? Sirs? Yeah,
Just
Dr.
for
Boros.
information of the committee's chairman, we're updating the numbers corresponding to the fact that 2017 used to be the starting point, so we're moving the figures to 2018. Thank you, very.
Thank you, Dr. Abola. Yusek Carl, can we just work with you to come up with appropriate language that's general enough and perhaps flexible enough to accommodate future action? No? Yeah, Director.
Sir, if I may. I know the Bureau is in the spotlight right now, especially with the left and right inquiries. But I would like to request, sir, that we take seriously the implementation of the fuel marking program, because this will at least guard the Filipino people from ensuring that the added, if there will be added taxes on fuel, we'll be able to really cost effectively collect and collect the proper duties, and at least be sure that we'll be able to curb out illicit trade on fuel.
Sana matino yung pag-implement ninyong fuel smuggling, kasi the hearing shows that kahit yung implementation yun ng customs modernization hindi matino, Director, to be honest. Pasensya na po dun sa lingwahe ko, pero hindi talaga matino. Nilagay niyo yung bagong importer sa green lane. Hindi tama yun.
Oh, sir. Yun nga po, sir. Ang inaano nga natin ngayon is how to address yung lapses and whatever is yung...
Ay, tanong ganda ng batas na ginagawa namin. Kung mali yung implementasyon, talagang walang mangyayari sa atin. Ganun lang talaga yun.
Yes, sir. That's why it's well noted, and I believe the Bureau is now in that direction, sir.
Sana nga. Kasi
yes, sir.
Nagsasawa na yung tao sa pronouncements na ganun, pero walang nakikitang action na corresponding. Anyway, pasensya na po.
Yes.
Kung may natamaan tayo, pasensya na po. Yusek Carl, anything else? No?
Just just to thank you and your colleagues and the stakeholders for this opportunity to explain.
Mahirap maging USEC, no? Mahirap din maging chairman.
Yes,
USEC,
yes. But for
wala na tayong katabi.
Yeah, for the
tayo pa yung nasisisi. Thank you, USEC. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to the department and all the guests. Thank you.